all-time move by Buddy though, right? Because a lot of times when people get divorced, the woman will keep the ring and she will not give it back, right? So my man says, "Yo, let me get the ring real quick." She like thinking he's gonna propose again. He said, "You cheating?" Now he can keep the ring, get his money back. That is brilliant,
That's a good
dog.
point. That's a
That
good
is.
point.
I hope he sets a precedent with that. That is brilliant.
From the creators of the legendary MD 2020, the original name and high flavor, high alcohol beverages with those unmistakable vibrant colors and iconic flask bottles, Mad Dog by MD 2020 brings the party with 15% ABV in a portable can that tastes incredible, delicious flavors that don't sacrifice on drinkability. There, we got 4 intense flavors: Bling Bling, Blue Raz, Mad Margarita, Spiked Strawberry, and Whipped Orange Cream, sweet, bold, and ready to drink. Pop the top and dive into vibrant, eye-catching colors that deliver on taste. Each sip is as delicious as it looks. No mixing, no mess, just pure flavor. High-quality taste without the premium price tag. Mad Dog by MD 2020 gives you more bang for your buck than anything else on the shelf. MD 2020 just got more convenient. Grab a Mad Dog by MD 2020 and experience why we've been fueling good times for generations. Look for Mad Dog by MD 2020 in your local stores and at drinkmd2020.com now. Must be 21 or older to purchase.
All right, welcome back to Macrodosing. It is Thursday. It's May 15th, and the Washington Capitals are playing tonight, and I will not be making a prediction about what happens in the game, besides the fact that I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to be on the glass.
I forgot about this.
I'm going to be on the glass Thursday night in D.C. I had to make it back to D.C. for at least one game.
Where on the rink, on the ice are you?
I think I'll have to look it up again. I think I'm on the glass directly opposite the Capitals bench.
So you're like, are you behind the penalty box or like next to it?
I think I'm next to the penalty box.
Okay, see, so I've done behind the bench and I've done on the glass, like down near the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assume the penalty box is similar to the bench in that the glass curves and it fucks you up on the other end real bad.
I hope not. I hope I'm far enough away from the actual penalty box that it doesn't get in my line of sight too bad. We'll see. I'm taking my mom to the game, Mother's Day present. And yeah, it should be great. It's going to be a great. I mean, what mom doesn't want to go to a hockey game on a double date with Nate from Barstool?
Yeah,
it's going to be excellent.
Facing elimination. Yeah, that's what she asked me for, and I'm a good son, so I listened to her. No, but it's going to be. I think it'll be a fun night. I hope we win. I think if we win Game 5, then we might win Game 6. That's my theory. That's just me rationalizing everything. Don't let us win tonight.
Don't let us win tonight. Don't let us win Game 5.
You should kill the Caps now.
Really, if you know what's good for you, Hurricanes, you will suffocate us. You will not let us out of that building, because if we get one, going to be a different story down Raleigh from last time. But yeah, it's May 15th. We got a few things to get to today. We're going to have an interview with Hakim, who Arian reached out to. He is a Marxist, and we have him on the show to discuss Marxism, some of the failings of Marxism in the past, some of the ways that he sees Marxism improving society. It's a good back and forth. I wouldn't say that it's an endorsement at all of Marxism for the most part, but it's I think that there's a good discussion that was had. Would you agree, Big T?
Yeah.
Big T did a great job pushing back, which I'm proud of Big T for. And I think if you listen to him, he actually knows more about the American economic system than most Americans do, despite the fact that he's an Iraqi citizen.
Back is my favorite way to push.
Yeah, it is. You don't want to push forward.
No.
Yeah.
So we get a lot. That's ironic.
It's not, but keep going.
We got a lot to get into today. It was kind of shocking how he like nailed all the issues that we're having, and I think regardless of what his solutions for those issues are, I think he brings up a lot of great points about kind of some problems that we're having in our society right now.
I think the best part, I think, is like when you actually listen to it, right? Because when people hear Marxism, it's a boogeyman. No, they shut it down immediately. Your head goes no. But when you start to listen to the points and break it down, most people that are for capitalism that I've talked to agree with a lot of the tenets. They'll be like, it's workplace democracy in essence, right? And it's like the next stage before communism, which is what a lot of communists want. And so, like, listening to him, he does a good job of like breaking it down. It's not some scary like lock up all your kids and date and camp, and it's just not what has been propagandized in the media.
Yeah, we should have a radical capitalist on the show.
We had
and
one.
Have him. Which one?
John Taffer.
Oh yeah, big time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a good conversation. So I hope you stuck around for that. We got some stuff to get into. First of all, there's some house cleaning that we've got here. Going back on a story that we reported on a couple weeks ago. You guys remember the Chicago cop that got in trouble for having crack cocaine during training?
Nuts.
There's an update to the story. Apparently, it wasn't crack cocaine at all that he had on him. So charges have been dropped against the guy. The guy had some baggies in his pocket. He was doing a training thing where they had like simulated crack that they were giving to some of their officers to try to, I guess maybe it was heroin that they were trying to show you how to do searches on people. So apparently what he had in his pants when they found the 3 baggies and the cargo shorts that he also claimed were his brother's shorts that he was wearing, right?
I think they were police pants. His brother was a cop, and he wore his brother's like police utility pants.
Yeah, so
he claimed.
So the cops have come out and they've said that it was not an illegal substance that he had. I don't know what it was. I don't think they said when they tested, right?
Is it possible that, because they described the bags as the ones that the cops had that day had blue stars and his had green money signs or something?
Yeah.
Were they just from when his brother did this same thing?
That's what I was thinking. It's from a different training seminar that they did. And they're like, these are green dollar signs, not blue.
Right.
It's like you're scratching off a lotto ticket. I think that's a cherry. No, this is different. This is different than what we gave out. So they arrested the guy. And I guess it was just fake drugs that he had on him from a different seminar. That's the best reading I think we can have on it.
And remember, we said this guy is either the dumbest person to ever live or the unluckiest. And it turns out he might just be the unluckiest.
Unluckiest wins. So does this guy get, since his face was everywhere, right? Like they said his name.
I didn't see his face till yesterday, but yeah.
Does this guy get a lawsuit against the Chicago Police Department? Like, does he not even have to become a cop? He can just retire off of training to be a cop?
I think a wrongful arrest lawsuit would be difficult when you did have bags of white powder. Like,
well, it was a wrongful arrest, wasn't it? Like the guy was training
I
to be a cop.
guess so, but
at some point, would they not? Would somebody in the police department not say, "Hey, we've used that bag before for other training"?
I don't know. His lawyer was saying that the cop that arrested him, I think he called him bad news. So
okay. So it was a bad news cop that arrested the good news cop that was going through training.
In training, yeah.
My other question is, isn't one of the first things they do to test the substance?
So I did read that they didn't test it immediately.
That would be the first thing.
Right.
They just looked at it.
The cop that got arrested, or the trainee that got arrested, did he know it was bogus drugs? It wasn't real drugs?
That's still not clear because when they asked him what that is, he said, "Oh, that's nothing. That's trash." And then they were like, "What the hell is it?" He's like, "Oh, these are my brother's pants."
This is somebody's lying.
So it's still weird.
Somebody lying, dog.
But I mean, they said they tested. I mean, obviously the cops wouldn't have let him go if it was real drugs. So
well, I think that's what it is. I think they did let him go. They let him go because he was a brother's cop.
I don't think so.
Oh, you think that it was real drugs and the real drugs belonged to his brother, and then they said we're going to let you go because we don't want your brother to get in trouble?
Possibly. It smells like cover up because none of this shit makes sense. This shit don't make any sense.
But this makes them look terrible. And trust me, the Chicago Police Department would not be doing that to make themselves look stupid.
And if they were covering up for the brother,
they do that enough on their
wouldn't
own.
they have covered it up for him?
No, because he was just a trainee. He wasn't part of the thin blue line yet.
But what if his brother was like, "Come on, man, like, help my brother out"?
Possibly, yeah, that's another option.
None of it makes sense. It just
doesn't make sense because the first thing that you do is you test it.
And if you know, if I'm him and I know that was trainee drugs, I don't know what the fuck it is. And I know it wasn't real drugs, I'll be like, "Yo, test it. We just use this for a training operation." Like that's the first thing that I say.
I guess the most generous reading of it is he genuinely had no clue those were in his pants, and then they pull that out. He's like, oh, like what do you do?
Yeah. Did I tell you guys about the time I participated in a police officer training?
Nah.
Wasn't it the sobriety test?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
DUI roadside training. Yeah, that was one of the best nights of my life. That was so fun. Just go to the police station and they just give you all the liquor that you want, and then you have to try to act sober. It was great.
Was it good stuff or?
Oh yeah, they had a pretty good variety. It was, I think they had.
I would like to do that. That would be fun.
They had Jack there. They had Captain Morgan. They had some sort of vodka. I forget what kind of vodka they had, but they had a pretty wide variety. And the best part was that they just gave you this liquor, and then they put on stand-up comedy for you guys to watch, and they passed out playing cards.
Nice.
So it's like
You just get faded with a whole bunch of strangers, have a good time.
Yeah, there were a couple different parts of the evening. Like I think the first one, they just passed out training cards, and then they put on music, and they're like, "Have a good time, guys." And then after the first hour, where you had to drink a certain amount, they refilled you, and then they put on stand-up comedy, and then everyone just had a great time. They had a blast, and then they ordered
that shit.
They ordered fast food for us afterwards too. It was just a great night.
Did you guys
a real treat?
Did you guys drive home?
No. That was one of the rules, was that you had to have a cab pick you up, but it turns out that one of the cops lived right next to me, so a cop just drove me home in his cop car.
Pretty lit.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Were you in the front or the back?
Oh, I was in the back.
How was that? Every
Kinda
time
cool.
I see a video of someone getting into a cop car, the back seat, the wall that's in front of the back seat is 6 inches in front of the seat.
Yeah, it's
I don't
tight.
know.
It's tight back there.
I don't know how anybody sits back there.
You have to
close quarters.
move your legs. If you're tall, you have to move your legs to the side. I got arrested. So you gotta move your legs to the side.
I did not have to move my legs to the side.
And you handcuffed too, right? So you like this. It's hella uncomfortable, and the seats are hard as fuck. It's not cushioned. It's like sitting on a McDonald's play bench. Shit is hard, dog.
I was super comfortable back there.
Oh, you
I was also hammered.
You swinging your feet.
Yeah.
I sat one for fun too before.
Yes.
Just wanted to see what it was like.
You got a ride?
Did it suck?
Yeah. It was tight even for me.
Okay, well then that's ridiculous. I mean,
I was pretty squished.
Police reform, just larger back seats, so that the average American can fit in there. Big T sent over some news. We got some news to get into today. What's this thing about exploding birds, Big T?
Yeah. Is it Richmond, California?
Yeah.
Yeah, birds are just exploding in the middle of the air. So some people think they're flying into power lines. Others have said that they're being shot with BB guns. There might just be a serial bird killer on the loose.
Okay.
But they're just falling out of the sky.
I mean, I hate to bring this up for 2 episodes in a row, but you know who the Rams' backup quarterback was last year?
Hang on. Do I? The Rams' backup quarterback.
Or was that 2 years ago? Yeah, last year he was not.
I don't know who the Rams' backup quarterback was. It's not Stetson Bennett.
No, it was 2 years ago. Last year he was.
don't know.
Last year he was on the Chiefs. Carson Wentz.
Big Hunter.
Big hunter. You've never seen that picture?
No, yeah, that's the only thing I know of his hunting prowess. But yeah.
Yeah, he's a genocider of ducks.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't.
So you have an off-season house.
Not a
in
big
Northern
duck fan
California?
in general.
Yeah, not a big duck fan on this podcast.
I hate ducks.
I mean,
I think they're so tasty though.
oh, they taste really good.
It's my favorite meat. I'm gonna go with BB gun for the reason these birds are falling out of the sky. How many are there?
I'm not sure. Enough that the town is contacting ABC News about it.
Huh. I think that there's like a troubled youth. It seems like there's a troubled kid in the neighborhood that's just going out and just open season on birds.
If you're just going around shooting birds, you got to spend a little time in jail. That's pre-crime.
In like
and I think it's a real crime too, but that's...
Wait, what do you mean? People hunt birds? Like quail and shit?
Not in a residential
I think
neighborhood.
going hunting is different than going around the neighborhood just shooting every bird you see.
Why?
Well, because somebody could get hurt.
Somebody could get hurt hunting. People
Yeah,
do.
but I mean,
Dick
if
Cheney.
if you- Well, that's a good point. When you're hunting around other houses there, how would you feel if your neighbor was outside with a pistol shooting up in the air?
Oh, it's with bullets.
Just
like real bullets?
Yeah, or a pellet. Or BB.
Pellets I would care less than real guns that could kill somebody. Then you have a point.
Yeah. Pellets you'd care a little bit though, right?
Yeah, no, I'm being an asshole. That you shouldn't shoot first.
I want to get to the bottom of this. I don't know. If it's power lines, I say the birds. This is on the birds. Yeah, you got to figure out your environment. That's user error by the birds. Figure out how to fly better.
Listen to this. PG&E said it sent crews to examine a power pole in the Richmond neighborhood that residents have cited as the possible root of the lethal problem. The company said the power pole in question is compliant with avian safe guidelines established by the Avian Power Line Interaction Committee.
I need to talk to somebody on the Avian Power Line Interaction Committee.
That was my thought as well.
That's a great job. I like that.
What does that pay?
For the chair? I think the chair of that committee is pulling in six figures.
Applich.
No way.
Yeah. Applich,
Nah.
the chair of Applich? Yeah, imagine the power you wield. Literally. It's like you don't get to build that. You don't get to do electricity because I'm a bird expert.
How many people do you think work at Applich?
Probably small organization.
200.
No.
That's a lot.
I think it's like 42.
I think that's a lot.
It's 42 of
I think this is 6 guys.
You think so?
Yeah. Let's look at their FAQs.
How often do they update their standards?
I'm not sure.
That's got to be like an every year thing because you have to stay busy, right? Because this feels like it could be a job that meets, I don't know, once every couple of years,
right?
Once every 5 years.
This job could be an email.
Yeah, it could be. Big T, I want your explanation behind this video that came out because it goes in the same line as the Shedeur Sanders prank phone call. I know what the video is. I know what happens in the video. I know why it's getting a big reaction online, but I also have zero desire to watch the video because it will make me uncomfortable.
Oh, you've opted out?
I've opted out of this video so far. The New Jersey Firefighter video. It's at his birthday party, right?
I think so. It's a party of some sort.
Yeah,
I
it's his
thought
birthday
either
party.
birthday or wedding.
Yeah, it says birthday party.
Can you explain to me what happens here? Because I'm not going to watch the video because it makes me uncomfortable just thinking about it.
Yeah, so it's this guy's birthday party. I think it's fake.
Okay.
I'm on team fake. But he calls up his wife in front of, all their friends and family, whatever. And he's like, give me your ring. And I think my reading of it was he acts like he's going to propose again or something. I didn't.
Okay.
But he's like, give me your ring. And then he kisses her like in The Godfather, when they kiss somebody that they're about to kill or whatever.
I know it was you.
Yeah. And I've never seen those movies.
Neither have
but
I.
I know they kiss somebody.
Yep.
And he's like, he just starts calling her every name in the book. He's like, I know what you did. Don't make me tell everybody what you've done. Do you want me to tell your children about this? So on and so forth. And then he kicks her out. And then I guess it turns into a divorce party for him.
Okay.
It seems fake, but there's multiple angles of it. Like people started filming in the middle, which makes me think like maybe it's
They see what's happening.
Yeah, I don't know.
Does she have friends there?
Seems like it.
Yeah.
What's her reaction?
They like ushered her off like when he was like chastising her. But
Okay.
all time move by Buddy though, right? Because a lot of times when people get divorced, the woman will keep the ring and she will not give it back, right? So my man says, "Yo, let me get the ring real quick." She like think he's gonna propose again. He said, "Fuck you, you cheating." Now he can keep the ring, get his money back. That's fucking that is brilliant.
That's
dog.
a good point. That's a good point.
I hope he sets a precedent with that shit. That is brilliant.
Now, a lot goes through my mind, though, when I see a video like this. If this is real, what's the upside, besides getting the ring back, what's the upside for the guy to do this? Because now your face is everywhere on the internet, and
I'll tell you.
Does it really make you look good?
The upside is, because I went through something similar. I didn't do this, but I did something similar when I found out I got cheated on. It's the immediate gratification that you get for embarrassing them like you feel embarrassed because you feel embarrassed. You feel like everything that your relationship with was a lie, right? You lied to me, you feel betrayed, and you want that immediate gratification of I want you to feel how I feel. And so what ends up happening is you end up he's probably gonna be like, if this is real, he gonna be like, I probably shouldn't have done that, man. You know what I mean? He gonna feel bad.
Yeah.
Most of the time I felt bad about what I did. But I like to give myself grace in that moment. I was fucked up emotionally, and like you could tell, oh well, if it's real, he's hurt, and he just wants to inflict that same as much pain and suffering as on him onto her. That's the goal.
And if it's fake though, why would you ever agree to do this? As the woman, and also as the man, but especially as a woman, why would you agree? Yeah, this sounds like a great idea for a viral video, honey. You're gonna get so many clicks. Yeah, sure, I'll pretend that I was cheating on you for the video.
Yeah, I guess.
No,
It feels a little too rehearsed.
Okay.
But it could be also what maybe this is a New Jersey thing, I don't know. What seemingly 46-year-old man is having like a huge blowout birthday party for himself? That seems a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
But people be celebrating their birthdays, dog.
Jerry said he knows him. I don't know if this is true or not, but he
Really?
tweeted, "This is my buddy Nikki G. Feel bad for the guy. He worked with Nikki Numbers, neighborhood fireman," which I know Nikki Numbers is real because he's told Madeline and I about him.
Neighborhood fireman. I like that. That's like a kid's book thing.
Well, that's his thing now.
Yeah, that's true. Mr. Jerry coming out soon.
So I don't know if that's true, if he actually knows him.
And
but-
PFT, tell me if this is ridiculous or not, but this elderly couple that just wanders in front of the camera several times at the beginning does lead me to believe it might be real. Like those people aren't actors.
No, yeah, you're right. That's a good point. They're just lost. They're like, where do we go? Where's the bathroom?
Yeah. They're just Bidening around in the middle for a little bit.
They are. Speaking of Biden, there's a whole bunch of content coming out now about how more people should have known that Biden was not doing well, especially in the last couple of years of his presidency. And there's a book that's coming out written by Jake Tapper and I forget who else. Somebody from Axion, maybe?
Yeah, it's some other journalist.
So in the book, they claim that George Clooney, who wrote that op-ed imploring Biden to drop out after that debate performance, that George Clooney really turned on Biden when Biden didn't seem to recognize him at a fundraiser. And at that point, Clooney knew that, yeah, Biden's cooked at this point.
It should be mentioned George Clooney says they've been friends for 15 years. He wasn't just like, I'm George Clooney, you should know who I am, which you should.
Maybe he's doing a great job acting.
Yeah,
He's completely transformed himself into another handsome man with a beard.
Right.
Yeah, so he's claiming that Biden did not recognize him, and that was kind of the last straw where he had to write this publicly. I would assume that Clooney also, he probably reached out behind the scenes to Biden before he wrote the letter, right?
I don't know. That was the same fundraiser, though, where he got like ushered off the stage. And people are like, "Oh, it's fine. He's mentally sharp. He's doing great."
Yeah. There was another debate where he started bleeding from his eye.
What?
No.
Yeah, looked at his eye had like blood in it. Yeah, look that one up. I think that might have been 2020.
Was it like a broken blood vessel?
It
like
might have
one
been
of those things.
It could have been
like
a
there
broken
wasn't like
vessel.
blood, like tears coming out. Of
No,
his
I
eyes.
don't think so.
Oh yeah, this was the previous election.
Yep.
Oh yeah, no. I thought you meant like bleeding from his eye. That's
Man, even
Nice.
2019 to now, he looks radically different. Like not even the same person.
Yeah.
yeah, he'll die soon.
Jeez.
You never know. Did we ever get any
Like
closure
80
on that
something, bro. That's
picture?
what happens. People, they get old, they die.
Do we get closure on that picture?
What picture?
The Easter picture.
I don't
no,
think so.
I never
I don't
heard
think
anything
there's-
else
I don't
from it.
think there's any closure.
I think it just kind of died down.
Yeah, I still stand by my take that it was a real picture that looked fake, and it would be funny if they just photoshopped him into every single picture that they put out from that point forward. But yeah, we never got. I haven't heard an update.
I'm not being facetious when I ask this. I'm being dead serious because you said that you think it's a real picture that looks fake.
Yeah.
And the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Is it a simpler explanation that it's a fake picture or a real picture that looks fake?
I think a real picture that looks fake, because I've taken a lot of pictures in various circumstances here in my job at Barstool, and there will be occasional pictures where it's like, oh, that guy looks photoshopped in. Like it's not a rare thing to say that.
It was the height he was at.
It was a height. I think it was a clumsy picture. I think it was weird. I think the lighting was kind of strange, but at the end of the day, I don't think that somebody sat down and like copied and pasted Joe Biden into the back of that picture. That's my theory. Also, I think that there would have been some detailed photo analysis done of that, and there would be smoking gun that was like, okay, yes, we found that he is officially photoshopped in here.
There's ways you could test that, right? With changing the contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not a photo expert.
If you're if that's your job, then you have access to tools that are just crazy and can figure all that shit out.
Right.
We're in for a great sports week with the NHL playoffs, NBA playoffs, and full slates of baseball, and ordering Pardon My Cheesesteak for your game day meal or late night eats is the best play call you can make. Pardon My Cheesesteak offers a wide variety of cheesesteaks, loaded fries, and popular desserts, all delivered right to your door so you don't have to miss any of the action on your couch. Pick your favorite cheesesteak made with thinly sliced steak, melted provolone, mouth-watering cheese sauce, and caramelized onions on a toasted hoagie roll. Or you can order the popular Big Cat combo and get your choice of a cheesesteak, fries, and a drink. Go to pardonmycheesesteak.com to order with code PMC20 for 20% off. All right, there goes PFT, leaving for his real family.
Sorry, man. We're happy to get him when we can.
We'll go to a baseball game.
Do we have any other stories, Arian? Before we
are we hopping right in?
No, I mean, do we have anything else to discuss? just you and I.
New Pope.
Yeah, Pope
What
Leo.
is this? Oh, yeah, I'm interested in this other article you posted.
The AI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess in the proposed new budget bill, I think it is, there's a provision in there that basically neither the federal government nor any state government can make any regulations for AI for 10 years, which is the most insane thing I've ever seen.
What is the reasoning for that?
I guess, I don't know. It says, hold please. Except as provided in paragraph 2, no state or political subdivision thereof may enforce any law or regulation regulating artificial intelligence models, artificial intelligence systems, or automated decision systems during the 10-year period beginning on the date of the enactment of this act. So they're just writing into law that nobody can make a law having anything to do with AI for a decade. Which is probably, they've been lobbied by OpenAI and Elon and everybody else.
What the fuck?
Which, what does that even mean? Like, if there's an AI model that starts, hypothetically, here's just where my mind went to immediately. Say there's an AI model that becomes radically convincing at, like, getting mentally ill people to kill themselves. Like, all these people are killing themselves because this AI model told them to. We can't say that's illegal?
Yeah, I don't have. I can't even understand the reasoning for this. And maybe they want like less regulation because people want more innovation in the space. I guess that is the most rational explanation. But even then, you don't have to.
It seems like you could tailor it much more narrowly.
That's what I'm saying. You don't have to suspend regulation to say, hey, let's invest in it. I have no idea. That is fascinating to me. What is the bill called? Do you know what the bill is called? Because I can't. It's like it cuts it off.
I'm not sure. It's the big. Is this the big beautiful bill?
I hope not. Jesus Christ. Because the tweet that you sent, it just.
Most of them are just that cropped thing.
Well, might as well ask AI.
It's
about
the budget reconciliation bill. I think that might be the big beautiful bill.
Big beautiful bill.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
We'll see where that goes, man.
And I'm generally a pretty cut the red tape kind of guy, but don't make it illegal to do anything if something goes wrong.
some kind of
I feel like that's reasonable.
Yeah, some kind of guardrails, man. Today we have on a really dope guest. His name is Hakim. He is a physician by trade, but he has a YouTube channel of well over 300,000 subscribers, and he talks about Marxism. He's a Marxist. He describes himself as a Marxist, and his content that he creates is political and economic philosophies on what should be, what shouldn't be, and it's really interesting content. I've subscribed to him for a while now. I don't consider myself a Marxist, but a lot of his anti-capitalist critiques I feel are very spot on, and so we're gonna get into that in a second.
Before we get into the topic today, it's going to be brought to you by Game Time. The NHL playoffs are here, and the only place to buy hard-to-get playoff tickets is Game Time, the official ticketing partner of Barstool Sports. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NHL playoff tickets. Prices on the app actually go down the closer it gets to puck drop. You can save up to 60% when buying last-minute tickets. I know PFT is going to the Capitals game tomorrow, and I saw an amazing deal for great seats on Game Time. You can get into, is it still Capital One Arena? I think it's Capital One Arena. Anyway, you can get in for $82 on Game Time for Game 5 between the Capitals and Hurricanes. It's that easy. What are you waiting for? I'm going to buy those Capitals tickets now. Take the guesswork out of buying NHL playoff tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code MACRO for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code MACRO for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? Game time.
All right, and with that, this is Hakim.
All right, welcome on a very special guest. His name is Hakim. He is in Baghdad, Iraq right now.
Hi there.
Hakim, it's good to have you on the show. We want to
Thank you
talk
very
to you
much.
about Marxism a little bit.
Absolutely.
I'm told that you are, what's the best way to describe you? Are you a Marxism enthusiast? Are you a Marxism scholar?
I am, by profession, I'm a physician. I'm a doctor. I work in emergency specialty, particularly. So my area of focus is emergency medicine. That's what I do for my education as well as my real life day job. But I have been a Marxist for a little while, I would say. So I would consider myself just a Marxist. I wouldn't qualify it with any academic pre or suffix.
Okay. All right. And what, tell us about your path to Marxism. How did you first get interested?
Well, I guess I can give it, it's kind of part and parcel of my introduction, really.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the very beginning that I'm Iraqi, which is understandably a position in which one kind of either inherits or comes into contact with anti-American perspectives. The idea, of course, when you're young, especially when there's aggression against your country by the United States military or whatever, economic or diplomatic, then at first it's a kind of a team sort of thing, an us versus them kind of deal when you're a bit more underdeveloped and you're thinking about it. But I remembered I was like, not only me, but everybody around me just had kind of this anti-American bend to them. And it was kind of phrased in very loose, well, they shouldn't be meddling in our politics, and it's horrible that the American government, by the way, this necessary qualifier, this isn't against the American people in any way. The American people have no say with what their government does, particularly when it comes to foreign policy. So I'm referring specifically to the American government, but most people had anti-American government sentiments, let's say. And as I grew up, I began to read more and come into analyses of why not only the United States, but many countries are the way that they are. What is it? What are the material reasons for certain foreign policy positions or geopolitical orientations? Why are certain governments set up the way they are? Which interests do the particular political classes in these different countries serve, and why? And when you enter into this sphere, there's a lot of mythology, there's a lot of idealistic thinking, there's a lot of stuff that's incorrect. And then there's a point where you reach a scientific analysis of social processes. And in this point, you kind of arrive at Marxism. where you begin to understand that no, there is a certain setup of governments and societies along class lines. What is class? How are they defined? And so on and so forth. And then afterwards, emerging from this class analysis, you can develop a general analysis of society. Why are things the way they are? Why is it that, for example, in many nations across the world, particularly across the West, they are supposedly democratic countries where people have full right and political ability to change their governments and do what they want. But interestingly, all the things that people are, or the things that people do desire, that is democratically popular, why do these things never actually come up or put into practice in these countries? An American example, I think that would be closer to home, is, for example, universal healthcare, which is incredibly popular in the United States. I think by overwhelming majority, 60 or 70% of Americans would like to have a universal healthcare system, but there is no universal healthcare system. Vast majority of Americans do not want to have a bloated military budget, but the military budget in the United States is bloated. Vast majority of Americans would like to have more political say over their foreign policy. They would like to pull out of all the wars, for example, that the United States manages to kind of jump into every few months, it seems. But they still happen nonetheless. Why is that the case? Well, that's because the vast majority of the American people aren't, the government is interested in their will or what they would like. That's what I mean with a sociological or class-based analysis. I can delve a little bit deeper into it. But that generally was the analysis. General anti-Americanism, and then I matured in my thinking, realized, well, no, it's not smart to just be against the United States for being against the United States. Americans are different from the government, and the government serves particular interests. Oh, wait, my own government serves particular interests that are against the Iraqi people. Had the situation been reversed, and Iraq been the major, metropole and whatnot, and the United States was a weaker nation, then perhaps because of the certain class dynamics, Iraq would have done similar things to the United States based on what would have been geopolitically in our favor, for example, and that would also equally be wrong. So on and so forth. It just kind of gives you a more rounded and accurate perspective, as well as it gives you the scientific basis to carry out your analysis of sociological and socioeconomic formations.
Okay,
long-winded answer.
No, it's very interesting. I can certainly understand growing up in Iraq having some anti-American sentiment. I'm not exactly sure why you would, but I guess I can empathize with it. And then instead of going in a direction that took you focusing on imperialism necessarily, which a lot of people have focused on, it was more like a broad sense of, well, what is it that makes these governments do what they do? I can give you, from my perspective, here's how things work in terms of American politics when it comes to spending money or giving good things to the citizens. And in my experience, it's like some people will say, we don't want to interfere in this war. We don't want to start a war. Let's take that money and let's spend it at home. And then instead of spending the money at home, if we come up with an idea that would help a lot of people, it's like, well, you can't do that because of the deficit. And then if it's like that, if the deficit isn't an issue, then they say, well, I don't want to spend money to help this group of people because this other more privileged group of people will get that same benefit. And you don't want millionaires getting the same free, why are we paying for millionaires to have health care instead of just the poor? So that's kind of how, that's the flow chart that I've seen. Yeah.
And that's part of the missing education there, that people are a bit ignorant of what would be best for society generally. And also the taking advantage of your supposedly democratic government. Again, I keep saying supposedly, I keep kind of doing this tongue-in-cheek thing because, again, Americans don't have any say in it. But had it truly been the case, then you would be able to, for example, try to at least mention to your representatives that, hey, it would be nicer to spend it on more logical things, for example, healthcare and education and whatnot. But when it comes to this in real life, then there's all this obfuscation. There's many thousand excuses that your representatives, political or otherwise, would give, but not when it comes to things that matter to the bottom line of those who donate the most to the political class. So, for example, the military always gets money. When it comes to Israel, with APAC funding and whatnot, Israel always gets money, right? Puerto Rico doesn't, okay, despite it being an American territory, but Israel does, despite it not being an American territory. That's also a bit tongue-in-cheek in a way, but things like this, right? It's disappointing to say or to see, but when you don't know why, when you don't realize that the United States is a system, and this is not only the United States, these are capitalist governments in general. These are systems in which there is a particular ruling class. That ruling class is the one which is made up of the vast majority of owners. What owners, I mean people who have who own means of production. This means land and capital and factories and large swaths of mineral resources and so on and so forth. And the government serves their interests rather than your interest as not a member, not of the ruling class, a member of the various other classes that kind of fall underneath the rubric of working class. It's a little bit more complicated. There's a few more classes really. Generally, but we to simplify things, we just break it up into two massive class groupings. But your interests are not met because you, for example, are not putting in millions of dollars into the pockets of your local senator. But let's say the pharmaceutical industry and insurance industry and weapons manufacturers and whatnot, they are putting millions of dollars into the pockets of your representatives, your senators, your whoever. And as a result, they draft laws and they pass through things that are in their direct interest, not in your direct interest. And if you were to kind of take this to its logical conclusion, over many years and decades and even centuries, the United States is a new country, but it's not 20 years old. It's quite a bit old now. You realize that there ends up being a concentration of power, privilege, influence amongst this ruling class, while the vast majority of regular Americans lose more and more say. Then you enter into more complexities between, for example, people who identify as white in the United States. Of course, white kind of differs between what area you're talking about in American history. And then you break it down further, the experience of Native Americans or indigenous people in the United States, the experience of African Americans, of people of Chicano heritage, and so on and so forth. There's more intersections that we get into.
Yo, I got a question, man. So I was subscribed to your YouTube channel probably, I don't know, like 2-3 years ago.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to see the growth in the interest involving anti-capitalist sentiment. What did you say your biggest, I guess, detractors say that are like pro-capitalism? Because when you say you're Marxist, I would say the vast majority of people that throw that claim around, I would say 99% of people actually that throw that claim around, especially in the political atmosphere in America, have no clue what Marxism is. They maybe have read the Communist Manifesto, maybe, like nobody really understands. I feel that levies that claim. What has been your biggest, I guess, resistance to anti-capitalist sentiment online? Because your presence is growing. I believe you have like 300,000 plus YouTube subscribers. So your presence is definitely growing. So you're definitely striking a chord with a lot. But because of that, you're probably getting a lot of flack. So what would you say that would be?
Sure. One thing is just it's always a perspective, a difference of perspective that's interesting. My experience as a Marxist from the imperial periphery, from outside of the North America and whatnot, the richest centers of the world, is very different when I see who a Marxist is. Because when you go to India or China or South Africa or Brazil or wherever else, or Indonesia, a Marxist is a very specific thing. Usually belong to a party or are somewhat engaged, so on and so forth. It's very clear, and these political groupings have very specific and rigid structures where you have to educate yourself. You have to know a certain amount of knowledge to even be qualified to be able to be part of this organization or group, and so on and so forth. North America, I'm not too familiar with. My interaction with it is only online. I've never been to the United States, for example. But when it comes to your question about the detractors and whatnot, it really goes over a range. You have a bunch of criticisms that can be seen as valid. You have criticisms that arise from historical ignorance, and they have criticisms that are just simply a rejection out of, again, an us versus them kind of perspective that the United States has inherited following the Cold War. I'll start with the most valid criticisms, and it could be certain people who think, for example, that certain Marxist positions or approaches to economic policies or political theory or whatnot might be either slightly too heavy-handed or too extreme, particularly things like that, especially in regards to the nature of the American socioeconomic existence. It might not work in this particular country, or you might have to go about it more slowly. The American population would not be ready for this kind of thing, or maybe the economic base might not be ready for this kind of thing, so on and so forth. And this is a conversation that can be had. I personally think that there are stages that can be taken, but or steps that can be taken. But then again, I'm not the one to decide these things. Americans are the ones to decide these things. Americans know their material conditions. Americans know the conditions of their neighborhoods and their state of infrastructure. They know how it is with their level of industry and so on and so forth. And American would be best to carry out this analysis in a group of other similar-minded people who are also educated, and then bring forth some sort of plan that could be suggested, discussed, voted on, and so on and so forth. Those are the people who have good criticisms. The fact that I might be quote unquote too far, me or other Marxists might be quote unquote too far with what we would like to see, and as for sociological and political and economic change in the United States.
What people is your? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, it's all right. I'm gonna go just through the other two very quickly. People who say things out of historical ignorance is just that they'll say certain things about Marxism that is just simply incorrect. Like, for example, that Marxists want to redistribute the wealth entirely. No, Marxism is not about redistribution of wealth. Marxism is about the collective ownership of the means of production. That means the people who work are the ones who should be owning things. That's as simple as it really can get, right? When you have, for example, oil refining or some massive manufacturing plant or complex, or Walmart, for example, it shouldn't be the Walton family that owns it, who just exists and sucks up all this the profit generated by all the workers. It should be something that should be run by the people who actually work it, all the logistical staff and the people on the floor and all the drivers back and forth that bring that maintain the supply of all these things. Like from the A to Z, all the people who run that particular enterprise should be the one to own it and work it and vote honest decisions and whatnot, because they're the ones most intimately connected to the job. For example, right? That is what Marxism is about. So that's one example of people who really don't know. Historical ignorance also extends to certain mistakes about things that have happened in history that they don't really understand. They would be like, for example, that hypothetically, Soviet housing was ugly. That's a common one that you see. And then they'd be like, you know what? The common derogatory term is commie block, I guess. And they'd be like, oh, well, we don't want to see this in the United States. But people don't realize that happened. The reason that kind of housing built up was prefabricated buildings that were made to resupply or build up again a massive housing stock that was lost during World War II. Right, entire cities and villages and towns were wiped out during the Nazi invasion, as a result of which there was millions upon millions of people that are homeless. How would you house millions and millions of people? You'd have to create the quickest possible housing that you can, just to slap it together so people can be out of the elements, and then afterwards you start building more proper and long-lasting dwellings, for example, right? And also, by the way, the idea of commie blocks and that ugly housing that exists in the United States too. It's called the projects, right? It's called communal housing or public housing, but it has never went to the same extent and suffers from defunding and bad maintenance and so on and so forth. And the third example of people who really don't have a valid, I would say, criticism are people who have this inherited idea from the Cold War that, USA, we are number one. Against any idea. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, socialism, for example, is one idea that they might be against, but it could be whatever else, right? Whoever the current American foreign policy directives dictate is the enemy right now. It's Iran, it's Libya, it's North Korea, it's Cuba, it's whoever else, it's Mali, whatever, right? Then all of a sudden, those people are horrible and we're the best because the United States is the best. And that's just a broken perspective and one that's a bit childish, right? The United States could be an incredible nation would it put in the changes that would benefit the vast majority of its population, rather than spreading misery along the globe with all these unnecessary wars and invasions that drain American people's tax contributions, the state budget, as well as American lives. Not to mention all the people that are murdered abroad for senseless, for natural resource profits and whatever else.
Yeah, so I think so I could just tell you from my American experience, not being of the, I guess, nationalistic veil of America, right? So I don't view America through the lens that probably my co-hosts do. I'm more critical of America and its foreign policy from a perspective of being an African American and seeing the kind of and I grew up in the FOI. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's the fruit of Islam, and so so Elijah Muhammad was extremely critical of all of America's endeavors. So I wanted to ask you, Like when I criticize capitalism or the United States foreign policy in America, for instance, you remember when American football players kneeled for the national anthem and it was like
Yeah,
worldwide news? Yeah, I was one of those
yeah.
football players that did, right?
Oh, mashallah.
And so when you do that, when you criticize America, its military, its police, its economic system, it's viewed in a very like demonistic way, right? Oh, you're part like you how could you right? So I wouldn't consider myself a Marxist. I'm very much anti-capitalist though. Uh when I say that, I know hairs on the back of some of these podcast listeners in America, well, they'll stand up like I can't believe it, right? I want to hear from your perspective in Baghdad and Iraq when you say, or do you say you're a Marxist, and what's your experience kind of spreading? Because you're very deep in the economic theory of it, and I want to know kind of your response to because here, if you say you're a Marxist, if you say you're communist, if you say you're anti-capitalist, people are like, oh, you're a Nazi basically, or in that same vein. So like, what is your experience in Baghdad when you profess your economic beliefs?
Sure. Yeah. I would say it's not only this is not only in Iraq. This is the vast majority of the world outside of the United States, for the most part. That most people, when you tell them you're a Marxist, they're just like, oh, cool, and they just mind their business. The reason is because Marxism as a ideological trend hasn't been demonized in the rest of the world in the way that it has been in the United States. There's reasons for this for the United States that I can get to, but in the rest of the world, the vast majority of people know somebody, for example, in their family that is a Marxist. They might have had a granddad who was a party member, for example, or they see their, in the May Day, so I mean the Workers' Day parades with the red flags and everything. Like, it's a known thing in society. There might even be a communist party in parliament or a socialist party. There might be several, in fact, that constantly, fight with each other. It's more normalized, and this is something that's kind of foreign to the American experience. Of course, it's not universal all over the world, but in most parts of the world, this is the case. Despite there being also a very significant drive to try to crush socialist movements around the world in every possible way. The reason is because it threatens the power and privilege of the capitalist class, those who own everything, because we say, hey, we want to abolish their ownership of private property. That doesn't mean, by the way, all private property, you keep your home and your toothbrush and whatever. What we mean is anything necessary for social reproduction. Meaning, for example, if one person owns a farm the size of Kansas, right? Maybe he should not own a farm the size of Kansas. Maybe that farm or the subsections of it should be owned by the people who work it, or it should be common ownership of the people who live in that area and not one guy or one family. That's what we mean when we want to abolish these things. These people who tend to be very powerful, when they hear these political and economic philosophies that want to take away the privilege and power, will then mobilize all their significant wealth to try to crush these movements. And that's what has happened historically. In the United States, this took a different form where it was highly organized. The United States is a young nation generally. Because of this, and because of the peculiarities of how it formed as a nation, the ruling class kind of was very powerful from a very early period. From the Revolution onwards, the American ruling class was just white landowning men of a certain, like, quasi-aristocratic. I don't mean in land-owning titles like they did in Europe. I don't mean in noble ways, but white landowning men, right? They're the only ones who had a say in the political system. They're the only ones who were really allowed to own anything. And this ownership extended not only to people and to land and capital, and it also extended to people. They owned slaves, so on and so forth. This development of the American ruling class kind of resulted in a much more directed effort in controlling both the media in the United States, because they basically owned all of it, but also all sorts of political formations in the United States, including what is allowed politically. When I mention, for example, hey, in some countries or many countries, there are a socialist party or several socialist parties in the parliament. When you get to say this to an American, you realize, what, a parliament? What's that about? Because the United States has only two parties. Since at least the beginning of the 1900s, there's only ever been two parties in the United States, the Republicans and Democrats. And they're essentially two wings of the same bird, right? They have complete uniformity on practically every single meaningful position, economic and political position. Their only disagreements are on minor social perspectives, abortion or LGBT and stuff. They disagree on that. But when it comes to, for example, military spending, they agree. When it comes to giving tax cuts to the rich, they agree. The Democrats kind of quibble about it, but they still do it, right? And we want to look at what they actually do on paper, not the things that they say, right? Actions speak louder than words, as I believe Americans say. when it comes to, for example, sending money to Israel. They are enthusiastic partners, both sides of the aisle. When it comes to crushing free speech, for example, they are completely on the same side of the aisle there too. So on and so forth. Generally, in the vast majority of the rest of the world, to just kind of circle back on your question, if you were to say that you're a Marxist to anybody, they will either just kind of shrug their shoulders, like, okay, cool, and it's like you told them you had a sandwich for breakfast. It's not a really big deal. Or they, if you meet somebody who's a bit more closely aligned to your thinking, will ask you more specific questions to see if they like you or not. What kind of socialist or Marxist are you? Will I see you at the next parade or not? These kind of silly things.
Yeah. I have what might be a valid criticism, and I know that Big T probably has a couple that he'd like to get off his chest too. But I think for the vast majority of Americans, when you talk to them about the accumulation of wealth at the top and you give them the numbers, I think almost everybody is like, yeah, this is a big fucking problem. This is bad. I forget the stat worldwide. And there's some stats in the United States that'll just blow your mind too. You might know them off the top of your head, but I think worldwide is the top 10 people own, they have 50% of the entire net worth of the world, which is just crazy to think
ownership too.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about in terms of what that means for power dynamics and how our economic systems are being run. That it's the very top of the top of the top of the top, that just these individuals, they just control everybody else's life. And I think a lot of people in America are becoming interested in hearing more about that and realizing that that's a problem as we get through what some people call late stage capitalism here. But I think what a criticism of Marxism, maybe not the ideology, but the implementation of it would be, is that in terms of the ideology, I think there's some valid things that Marx points out when it comes to owning the means of production. I think he's got some good ideas about, if you spend your time and your labor doing something that you care about, you see a reflection of yourself in your work, then you lead a more fulfilled life. I think in the implementation that we've seen of Marxism, and it's been kind of twisted and bastardized in a couple different circumstances. Certainly the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, as it progressed, it had a significant amount of issues, I think, especially towards the end.
Absolutely.
And then in China as well, Maoism. That was kind of their version of Marxism. There were there were atrocities that were committed. There was the stealing of land, the execution of landlords by Mao. There's a lot of criticisms that you can make about the implementation that we've seen.
Sure.
And is that something that we should be wary of and avoid? And I think that's why a lot of people are like, I don't like the word Marxism because it reminds me of all these bad things that have happened when it's been put into practice.
Absolutely. You're completely correct. Something that a lot of people don't know, I mean, I can imagine also particularly in just general North American circles, where there aren't people of these viewpoints present, they'll be surprised to find out that the people who have the most ruthless criticism, evidence-based ruthless criticism of former socialist experiments are Marxists, because these are examples that we want to learn from, so that for future developments we'll have a better approach and better analysis, and so on and so forth. You're very correct. There are many historical mistakes and errors that have been made. Certain atrocities that were committed that should not be repeated and should be rightfully condemned. All this is correct. But you also have to maintain or understand these mistakes within their historical, social, political, and economic context, right? When you compare relatively, and this is not me trying to do a whataboutism, it's just me trying to point out the reflection that most people don't really think about. The United States currently is the richest country on earth. It is arguably the richest country in history, right? It has achieved certain magnificent things over its time, but also it has achieved the enslavement, largest almost by mass enslavement of a single race, and also the extermination of another. We're talking about the enslavement of Africans, which progressed through a horrific system of importation of slaves, mass chattel slavery, which then led into sharecropping and Jim Crow laws, which then went into the various civil rights disturbances and lack of equal rights for people of those slave descendants, African Americans, up until this day, right? It continues across every single economic facet. And then you can compare with the Native American example, the people who occupied this or lived here, the indigenous population of North America had been all but entirely eliminated. There's a handful of the original population. Some estimates put it up to 100 million people that were killed. As a result of not direct killing, a lot of them was direct killing, but a lot of it was because of diseases being spread, them being pushed out of their land, so on and so forth, right? The United States could not have developed to where it got, aside from with those circumstances. The United States is where it is today based off of the sheer amounts of labor that if you were to measure it, it would account for the trillions and trillions of dollars of African people that are brought to North America, particularly the United States. And then afterwards, by the way, further exploitation. The vast majority of American infrastructure was built by relatively underpaid or unpaid African American labor, for example. And also the complete extermination of another race. That's something you keep in the American example to keep it within the context of what it had experienced historically. When you look at, for example, the Soviet Union did not have this, right? They had many other mistakes, which were very, very severe, but it did not exist off of, for example, enslavement of one race and the extermination of another. Also, the United States existed in an extremely privileged position where it had basically virgin land. That concept of manifest destiny. Native Americans did not industrially exploit the life out of the North American continent the way that the coming American nation would do and has done since, right? You cannot compare this to the experience of Tsarist Russia and its development to the Soviet Union. Likewise, the United States existed in a particular geographic position which was very beneficial to it. Nobody could really invade the United States in the way that Russia had been invaded over and over and over again. Nobody could really economically blockade or sanction North America or the United States in the way that the Soviet Union was, for example, so on and so forth. This is not to excuse the Soviet Union. They had many mistakes and they should be criticized. But you have to remember that after their revolution, the Soviet Revolution, the Russian Revolution specifically, the Soviet Union was instituted in 1921, the Russian Revolution was in 1917. The Russian SFSR, so the Socialist Republic, as well as the subsequent Soviet Union, was invaded by over a dozen nations. It was sanctioned by even more than that. It was diplomatically isolated and vilified. There was no economic trade going in and out in all practice. The United States did not recognize the Soviet Union until the mid-30s. Right, nearly 2 decades after, or more than 2 decades after the revolution, and the United States was the richest country practically, or about to be the richest country on earth. That these are very significant things that force you into a kind of siege mentality that requires you to be a lot more heavy-handed. If the United States was to become socialist, for example, take a process of becoming a socialist nation, they would not have the same limitations, and as a result, they would not have to develop the same kind of internal security apparatus. They would not have to mobilize as many people to labor like as the Soviet Union would have had to do. The United States has a massive industrial base comparatively that it can mobilize to improve the quality of life of Americans, so on and so forth. My point with all this presentation is that you have to maintain everything within its context. Ruthlessly criticize that which deserves to be criticized, which is things that you mentioned, the various atrocities and mistakes and even crimes, if you want to put it in that way. But also remember that things happen for a reason. Things happen within the context of limitations that exist. And when you compare the development of different nations and what background they came from or what they eventually developed into, for example, the Chinese example versus the American example, the total net, quote unquote, effort required was substantially more in one side than the other. And the reason is because of those previous limitations I mentioned. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's valid to say that every system that's in place exists within the context of its time. Yeah. And the atrocities that are committed they're not exclusive to the economic system around them. There's other factors. Exactly right. That influence them, and some of the harshest critics that I've heard of anything resembling Marxism, or really anything that could be connotated as socialist or on the left side of the political spectrum, come from people whose families were former residents of communist countries. For example, Cubans who've immigrated to America, they tend to be some of the most right-wing people that you'll come across because they warn of the dangers a communist takeover. So that's something that exists in people's minds. I think for good reason too. When you hear people who have shared their experiences, you tend to listen to some of the things that they have to say about them. But yeah, do you have any thoughts about the different systems that have been put in place across the world and specifically Cuba and China and some errors that they've made?
Sure. About the point that you made with people who have lived in former socialist countries and their opinions, I think you need to approach each person as an individual, and this is why class analysis is important. You need to see what background this person comes from. Why do they have their opinions? Why do they have the opinions that they do? People's perspectives are not intuitive in and of themselves. People's perspectives are informed by their experiences and their background, social, political, religious, cultural, and so on and so forth. If you notice, particularly in the early period, right after the Cuban Revolution in the early 60s and whatnot, the vast majority of people who left Cuba to go to Miami and to the United States were people of a very specific class background. These were upper middle class or upper class white Cubans who previously had owned much more than let's say, would have been able to own in a fair system. These people had exploited African and mixed race labor. These people had either through bribery or through corruption or through nepotism made their way into political and economic positions which they otherwise would not have been able to enter to had the people who with proper qualifications been given the opportunity, so on and so forth. These people were the first group of people to leave Cuba. There's a joke amongst the left. It was like, oh, Castro was so horrible. He kicked me out of my mansion. And he took my slaves away, which is like a joke. But there's a grain of truth to it. A lot of these people were people who owned, for example, casinos where they had essentially poor women working as prostitutes for American businessmen and sailors and military personnel that were stationed in Cuba, and they would essentially just basically make their wealth off of prostituting their own nation's women, the absolute poorest, most downtrodden, the people who couldn't find any other opportunity to support themselves, and they got rich doing this. And then when they leave into the United States, they're like, oh, well, they took away my casino with all my, right? That's what I mean. That doesn't mean everybody is like this, of course. There's some people who were actually wronged by the system, and these people should be listened to, and their criticism should be absorbed and understood, and they should be taken seriously for corrections that need to be created. When it comes to particularly Cuba, though, the Cuban example has never been allowed to develop. By the way, it has developed spectacularly despite the limitations placed upon it. But the Cuban example has never been allowed to develop to its full potential because the United States has had a merciless economic embargo since the foundation of socialist Cuba, since the 60s. So we're talking almost a century. We're coming up to in just a few decades. Cuba has been economically blockaded to such a point that if you have a ship carrying goods that drops anchor in a Cuban port, it can't drop an anchor for 100 days in an American port. Meaning, that basically means if you trade with Cuba, then you're completely cut out of the American market, which is a significantly bigger and wealthier market. So if you want to make money, you go to serve the American market instead, and you don't bother going to Cuba. That's one way of embargoing. Another way of embargoing, of course, is many terrorist acts that the American government has carried out against Cuba, destroying port infrastructure, destroying boats, destroying fuel refineries. And this is all, by the way, declassified information by the CIA. I'm not saying anything that's not known here.
We had
aside from
Operation Northwoods was a CIA project that I think we're going to hijack our own airplanes and then blame it on Cuba.
Exactly right.
It's crazy
these
stuff.
are the things that we know about. This isn't only that there's other admittances. Certain factories were sabotaged with explosives, killing hundreds of workers in Cuba. And I believe it was JFK who personally signed off on this merciless terrorist attack to destroy economic infrastructure and also kill innocent people, just to attempt to retard the development of Cuba. Despite this, Cuba has better health expectancy than the United States. Cuba has less infant mortality than the United States. Cuba has better healthcare access in general, has better education. Cuba graduates more medical graduates than the United States. I think per capita, I think it also total amount, but you're gonna have to double check that. It's at very least per capita.
Higher literacy rate too, I believe.
Yeah. There's many other victories of that system, despite the horrific economic sanctions placed against it. That's not even mentioning the political sanction or diplomatic isolation that was forced onto the Cubans. Your question more was about previous mistakes, I believe. You want examples of previous mistakes of socialism?
Yep.
All right. There's a couple of them, and this is kind of where the education part of it has to set the scene, because there's certain things that I could mention that you kind of have to have a lot of background information to understand, and there's certain things that are much more obvious, let's say. Examples that would be obvious, for example, in World War II, in the early part of World War II, in the Soviet Union, they deported certain populations from the borderlands of the Soviet Union, because they believed that these populations might be reactionary of some kind. They might ally with the Nazis, or maybe some small proportion of them had allied with the Nazis, but not all of them. But as a result, like to be safe, quote unquote, they deported en masse these populations towards the interior of the Soviet Union because they were afraid of the military situation getting worse. This was a significant mistake because a lot of people suffered in this. A lot of innocent people were essentially accused of, oh, well, you're going to collaborate with the Nazis, so you need to be sent to Siberia. Despite the fact that they had no evidence of them doing wrong. This was an assumption, a broad brush that they painted over an entire ethnic grouping. This is very incorrect. I think that I don't need to explain why this is a mistake and this was a crime that shouldn't have happened. But this is not unique to socialism, right? This is an example of the circumstance. The United States did something equivalent, essentially, with their Japanese population and amongst others, with their detention centers, for example. So these are like context specific. If you want specifically issues with socialism, there's a lot more. There's certain things that they could have done with economic development. They would focus more on heavy infrastructure than light infrastructure. Again, this is why I mentioned the information. You have to have a certain base amount of knowledge to develop this point. What I mean is, when you have a new country that needs to industrialize quickly, because before they were not an industrial nation, meaning they could not produce iron and concrete and all these things you need for infrastructure, right? You have to very heavily focus on building the machinery to build this all the prerequisites of heavy industry, right? But when you focus on heavy industry, you kind of forget about or reduce the importance of, or don't focus nearly enough on, light industry. Light industry is what gives you, for example, sanitary napkins for women and toasters and whatever, like garment goods, the oil that you particularly like for a vehicle or something. These small things, right? All the prerequisites for certain fabric developments for different kinds of clothing, so on and so forth. These are light industry examples, right? Different kinds of yogurt, let's say, right? When you neglect this, then you neglect a very significant part of what the vast majority of people enjoy. There's a funny little anecdotal joke of a Soviet professor, a female Soviet professor of engineering, where she said that the youth in the Soviet Union, this is late Soviet Union, so in the 80s, it was like the youth of the Soviet Union decry that we don't produce lingerie, but we launch Sputniks into space. That's also funny enough because the Soviet Union did produce lingerie. It looks a little granny-like, but it did produce lingerie. But my point here being is, if you compare it to the United States, for example, if you're to look at any sort of soft or light industry good, there's a much wider pool of choice, and that's because the United States is a far more economically developed country. When people can see that, okay, well, we're building magnificent dams and we're sending satellites into space and we have fantastic tractors for mechanized agriculture, this is all nice and good. But when you go home at the end of the day, you want a very nice coffee maker. You want like these little trinkets that you have. You want to have these different creams and soaps and different kinds of fabrics and whatnot that you enjoy, that make life pleasant for the vast majority of people, right? That improve your quality of life in a much more personal sense, let's say. This is something that a lot of socialist countries neglected, and not because they wanted to, but because they had to. They either had to choose industrial development, meaning steel and concrete and whatnot, so we can make tanks so we can resist the Nazi invasion, or we make, for example, like decorative mugs, and then all of us would be speaking German right now, right? So it is a product of their limitations. That's one very big example, and I would say it's the easiest one to get people to understand. A lot of other ones include certain like political participation limitations. The internal security apparatus was a large burden on their populations in many of these socialist nations. For example, Right now, it's looking actually kind of pleasant in comparison to the current situation in the United States, I would say. As funny as it sounds, there was nothing in the Soviet Union where somebody just pulls you off this side of a street and into a van and drives you, and then you're never heard of again. This has been happening in the United States on several occasions recently over the past couple of weeks. Until enough people make a big fuss online that they're like, okay, you know what, this person's alive, but we can't disclose where their location is. I'm talking about the people who are arrested by ICE agents and then deported. My general point being is that the issues that exist in the Soviet Union or other socialist nations very wide, very diverse, but we also have to maintain them within their context and realize that one should not throw stones out of glass houses. A lot of the times, the things that we criticize of previous socialist experiments, which deserve to be criticized, exist to the same extent or to a much larger extent in the modern United States, for example. But people just deal with it like a normal part of life, right? If people in the Soviet Union were ejected ambulance rides or would be thrown out of the street, out of a hospital to die because they could not afford healthcare, that would be decried to this day as a horrible failing of the social system. How could they do this to their population? Oh my God. But this happens very frequently in the United States.
I think
right?
with the ambulance, it's mostly you can get an ambulance ride, you can get into the ER, but when you get out, you're going to be in crippling debt for maybe the rest of your life. Yeah, I know Big T's got some questions.
Please go right ahead.
I have several. Where do we start?
Right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I've heard you talk a lot about the ruling class, which is obviously a very a tentpole idea of Marxism. And you're very critical, obviously, of the ruling class in the United States, which you would say is like, Jeff Bezos, capitalists of that ilk, I assume.
Generally, yeah.
Is the idea then that there isn't a ruling class in Marxist countries? Because it would seem to me that is just then transferred to governments that become very repressive and they just become the ruling class rather than, people in a capitalist economy.
That's a fantastic question. Thank you for that. This is a very common misconception of socialism. When we say ruling class, it does not mean that there are not ruling classes in other systems. When you approach sociology, particularly historical sociology, how systems were built up, right? From slave societies through feudalism in the European context, of course, different parts of the world had different socioeconomic setups, to capitalism and then whatever future formations come, there was always a ruling class, right? For example, in slave-owning societies, it was the slave owners. I mean, in the Roman Republic, for example, it was the largest base of those who owned slaves and who benefited from the wealth generated through slave labor. In feudalism, it was feudal lords or aristocrats who benefited from those on their fiefdoms, the serfs or peasants who worked and gave a portion of their labor or their production to the feudal lord, who then benefited from this. Under capitalism, you have the working class who produces the vast majority of everything that we see. Every single thing that you have around you, from the computer you're working on to the mic you're speaking into to the clothes that you're wearing to the building you're in, was built by workers. It was not built by capitalists. These are working people just like you who built everything around you. These are the people who create all the wealth in society, right? Of course, they take into consideration what nature has produced as well. It's not just labor that produces wealth, but there's a technical point, right? The working class under capitalism is subservient to the political will of the capitalist class, right? They sell their labor, basically, to the capitalist class in return for a wage. Meanwhile, capitalists own everything, and they don't have to sell their labor to anybody. They own everything, right? And as a result, because of this significant power disbalance or imbalance, they get to decide, basically, what the political outcomes are, what the economic policies are. They do this through various obfuscatory means. It's not always a direct thing, right? But they control governments generally. Under socialism, the idea is to turn this class pyramid upside down, that the ruling class then becomes the working class. In Marxist jargon, they're called the proletariat. The working class then becomes the political leadership of a particular nation. How this is set up, there's a huge, diverse discussion about how you can do this. You can do this through party formations. You can do this through cooperative ownership of different enterprises that then elect representatives to a larger council, for example. You can do this through more direct democratic means. Some of these have been tested historically and have been successful. Some of these are more theoretical and have not been tested. And there's certain things in between, right? As for the point that you mentioned that in socialist countries, it seems like the government becomes the ruling class. and then they can grow tyrannical. This is also one of those criticisms that people have of certain socialist countries, that leadership, which at some point was a working class leadership, can become ossified, can have different, and this is again Marxist jargon, different relations to the means of production, meaning that instead of them working in means of production, then they can begin to directly own them. And as a result, their class perspectives change, and they become this new ruling class that is not working class based, but more on the capitalist side, let's say. This is a valid criticism that existed of many socialist nations. But I'll pull your attention to one example, which is the Cuban example. There is a thriving democracy in Cuba. A lot of Americans are kind of irked by the suggestion that Cuba is more democratic than the United States, but it is the truth. It is more democratic than the United States. And I'll give one simple example. Very recently, there was a rewriting of the Cuban Constitution. The Cuban Constitution was rewritten by the Cuban people. Suggestions were sent in by the Cuban people into the government. I believe there was over 180,000 edits to the Cuban Constitution, the new one. And then afterwards, when it was published, there was a vote to adopt this new Cuban population. And this was a free and fair vote by the population. Anybody who's eligible to vote, I believe from 16 years of age, even went and did vote. I think voter turnout was something like 80%. And the Cuban people overwhelmingly voted something like 65 or 70% for this new Cuban constitution. And now it is the constitution of the nation. There's nothing nearly similar like that happening in any part of American history. As a comparative example, the Cubans have done interesting experiments with their own democracy that have been successful. Other things, not so successful and possibly undeserving of criticism. But we always need to keep an open mind. We need to analyze things objectively. We need to look at the evidence and make sure that the things that we hear about these nations, are they actually true, or are we being fed a particular story or a spin on it that might be not in our direct interest to believe. I hope that answers your question a little bit. I kind of went a bit all over the place.
Okay. So you talked about everything in this room, cameras, computers, shirts, whatever, are all made by people who don't own the means of production. So I'm wearing a football jersey that was made in some fanatics factory somewhere at a huge markup, right? And those people don't own, anything. However, in the U.S., I could go start a t-shirt company tomorrow if I wanted to and sell the same shirt at whatever price I wanted. And if I sold it, then I could keep all the money. Is it your idea that some of the things you like about Marxism couldn't exist in a capitalist economy already?
This is also another very good question. I'm going to introduce another little bit more complicated Marxist term. It's something called the centralization of capital. What this means is exactly what you referred to when you say, I could go and start my own t-shirt company. Sure, t-shirts are a very low input, generally, commodity in general. It's not very difficult to produce a t-shirt. But let's say you want to produce a computer. Let's say you want to produce a tractor. Let's say you want to produce, for example, pharmaceuticals, right? You can't go and just start a pharmaceutical company, even for more developed things. Let's keep it at t-shirts, right? A random or a general statistic. The vast majority of Americans who try to get a business loan cannot qualify for a business loan to begin with. If they do pass the threshold to qualify for a business loan, and I think there's less than 20% of Americans who can match this. So the example you're given is already excluding the vast majority of Americans, right? And this is the richest country on earth, by the way. It's even less for Bangladesh or Kenya or all these other capitalist countries. In the United States, the vast majority of people cannot even qualify for a business loan. Hypothetically, let's say they do qualify for a business loan and they do start that t-shirt company. Do you know the percentage of businesses that fail within their first year in the United States?
I'd guess 90 plus.
Exactly right. Over 90%. I believe the current latest percentage is 91%. So the vast majority of businesses fail. Why do they fail? It's not because you didn't make a good enough product. The vast majority of the time, it's either logistical, financing, or marketing issues, because you do not have the capital to mobilize to penetrate into these well-developed markets. And this is for a t-shirt, which is a very low, or a clothing, which is relatively low input. If you want to make, for example, pharmaceuticals or more complex machinery, this is, in essence, prohibited. You cannot enter into the sphere. As much as you would like, you would never in a billion years be allowed to take the $50 million loan from a bank as a regular American, right? You already have to have significant amounts of capital and connections to be able to even enter into the sphere. And this is why I bring the concept of centralization of capital. In the early part of capitalism, you could kind of just, anybody can go and start whatever they want because it's kind of a free-for-all, as long as, I mean, of course, there's certain biases and privileges, but generally a free-for-all. You can kind of start a business and do what you want. I'm talking about the 1800s. But when people start companies, right, let's say you have shirt company A and shirt company B. Shirt company A competes shirt company B, right? They produce better quality at cheaper prices at larger margins, so on and so forth, right? They outcompete shirt company B, right? Once they do that, right, do they let shirt company B, after they beat them in the competition in the market, do they let them keep their market share? No, they completely cannibalize it. They become the big dog player, right? That's for a shirt company. Now replicate the same example over the entire economy. I'm talking pharmaceuticals, I'm talking media, I'm talking electronics productions, I'm talking food production, so on and so forth. When you look at the early part of capitalist history, there are many different producers. 6, 10, 12, 50 different companies that produce things. The longer capitalism exists and develops, the smaller these proportion of producers exist, right? Because individual capitalists, or individual companies, more accurately, become more successful than others. They eat their competition, they become super big, and then as a result, the market share gets divided between fewer and fewer companies or capitalists. At the end, then you end up with, for example, when it comes to American examples, I'm not so good. I believe you have like 3 companies that provide SIM cards or like connection for phones, Sprint and AT&T and stuff like that. I don't remember them off the top of my head in the United States. But there's just a few of them. There's a handful of them. There used to be many more. If you look at media production, for example, you used to have over 20 different major media producing houses. Now almost everything belongs to Disney oh my God.
It'd be
What are
like
the other ones?
Viacom,
NBC.
there's several, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. They cannibalize their competition, and then afterwards they're fewer and fewer. This also happens now in late-stage capitalism. That's what kind of prohibits you from even entering into the space, because now there's already, for example, Procter & Gamble as a pharmaceutical company, or just all these other ones that are multi-billion-dollar industries. There's no way you, as an individual, a regular American guy from a regular American city, the average Joe, that would be able to allow you to enter into the sphere. And this kind of goes into a nice little quote from the Communist Manifesto, where Marx says that the capitalists themselves do not like the fact that Marxists are for the abolition of private property. But people don't realize, or these capitalists don't realize, that private property is already abolished for 9/10 of the population. The vast majority of people cannot own vast tracts of land. The vast majority of people cannot own a $30 billion car production company, or electronics producing company, or a massive agribusiness, right? Vast majority of people, at best, in the current American system, for example, would be lucky if they owned their home and their car. Even they weren't completely pulled down by all its debt and all its other limitations that are put on you economically. So that's why I'm saying it is a very nice idea to feel like, oh yes, well, I can go and start my own business, and then I can become one of the successful people. But in essence and in reality, this is so prohibitively difficult, nearing almost impossible for the vast majority of people. And that's why when you look at the examples of the people who have made it, from Bezos to Elon Musk to whoever else, these people came from highly privileged backgrounds, wealthy backgrounds. Bezos, I believe, got a loan from his parents that, adjusting for inflation, would be over $500,000 in today's money. I don't know if your parents have $500,000 to just loan you willy-nilly to start a company. I know for sure my parents don't. I don't think anybody's parents here has that kind of money. Elon Musk's father had the distribution rights from 3 emerald mines in South Africa, apartheid South Africa, right? I don't think your parents have distribution rights of emerald mines in a racist apartheid state like South Africa. This is what I mean. Even the mythology, even when you look at the people who made it, crumbles because they're not a regular Joe. These people are so exceedingly few that actually made it to this point. The vast majority of people were like Henry Ford and whatnot, or Elon Musk. They were already privileged enough to be able to enter into the sphere. I hope that kind of rounds off.
What about the argument that that capitalism inherently it breeds innovation? That the desire to make it into that top 1% of the 1% is the reason why you get the outliers, the people that see something that is a gap in the marketplace, that they have an idea they could improve on, and the desire and the drive to execute on that and to achieve extreme wealth, that could be seen as a net benefit for the entire country.
Sure. There's a few points. This is also an excellent point. there's a few comments on that you can give. First of all, money isn't the only motivation, but it is a good motivation for a lot of people, but it's not the only motivation. But more importantly, the first nation to develop and send satellites into space was not the richest country on earth, the capitalist United States. It was the socialist Soviet Union that did this in over a period of economic development of 30 years, when before they were using wooden plows, and then they were sending Sputniks into space, right? This is a significant economic development, and there was no profit motive under the Soviet Union. Amongst many other things, right, that were the massive amounts of innovation that existed. But also you have to remember that innovation under capitalism is not always technical and technological innovation that's positive for increased efficiency and whatnot. That used to be the case very early on in capitalist development. But now when it gets very expensive to make significant breakthroughs in technological development, you kind of reach a cost benefit analysis where you realize, hey, you know what? Actually, instead of innovating more, maybe we should make this product that you purchased once and then you owned, maybe we should turn it into a service instead. Now it's a subscription. So before you bought it once and now you owned it. Now you have to pay for it in perpetuity. This is a capitalist innovation for a service that doesn't essentially change, right? This is not a smart innovation. It is an innovation, but it's not a good one, right? It's one that reduces your quality of life, but it increases the profits of somebody else. I'll give a better example than this. Planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence did not exist in socialist systems because people wanted, or the socialist in socialist nation, you want any good, whatever it may be, from a shoe to a car to a satellite. You want it to be as durable and easily repairable as possible. You put a lot of effort into producing this. You want this to be a good that will endure the test of time and be able to be upgraded and fixed and whatnot. Under capitalism, it's the other, you flip this on its head. We want people to buy as much of this as possible because we want to maximize our profit margins. So do you know what we do? We put an artificial limit on the lifespan of a product. For example, batteries are a perfect example of this. The iPhone battery is known to be artificially reduced and limited through iOS updates. Because they want people to feel like, oh, my phone's getting slow, it's becoming a piece of shit, I should go buy a new phone instead. Oh yeah, well, I mean, the iPhone whatever number just came out, okay, well, then I'll get that one. There's increased profits despite it damages the environment, it damages your own economic prosperity because you're having to have a phone nowadays is an absolute must. You can't live a life without it, and if your battery sucks, you can't change it yourself. It's not like you can buy a replacement and then make it yourself. Apple doesn't allow you to do this anymore, or ever, I believe. So you're forced to go and basically either refurbish your iPhone for a pretty penny, or you have to go and buy a new phone. New cars, for example, a very common thing as well. They break down. I think there's even a known complaint in the American car scene, where American cars produced prior to the 80s, for example, were reliable. You could beat the life out of them and they'll still run with 500,000 miles on the gauge or whatever, and they'll still be, if you took good care of it. Good luck getting a modern Ford to run 100,000 miles, let alone 500,000 miles. Good luck getting it to run 50,000 miles without it breaking down, right? So on and so forth, right? And this is like through cost-cutting measures and through planned obsolescence to limit the lifespan so that they can maximize profit by you buying more. This is a form of innovation that is more widespread under capitalism now. That's not to say that capitalism does not encourage innovation, because in order to win out in the competition, usually you need to either reduce the amount of money your workers are paid so that you can invest more money into the circuit of capital so you can develop, or you create a new technology that allows you to produce more for less, which allows you to charge less money so you can beat out your competition and make a large profit, and so on and so forth. But the more capitalism has developed, the less you see this happening. And now the largest center of innovation globally, right, scientific innovation, is not the United States. That was surpassed in 2018, I think, 2019, somewhere around there. It is currently the People's Republic of China. That is the largest innovator on earth. And almost everything that we're seeing, that's why even Americans went on, when TikTok was banned, and they went on the Red Note app, and they were like, oh wow, the Chinese, we thought were living like, in 1000 BC, but no, it turns out they're living in 2050. We're sitting here with all our quote-unquote backward tech, meanwhile they're living like that. Of course, these are perspectives and optics and whatnot. It's not exactly as clear-cut as this, but my point being
Chinese cars is crazy.
Exactly right. I actually rode a BYD the other day. First time in my life I rode a BYD. I feel so bad for you Americans that you do not have this experience. That was a magnificent vehicle. I was genuinely floored by the quality of it and for the price of it. And then I started looking at my car, which is a French one. I know. Please don't come after me. I was forced to buy a French car. God help me. And I sat back in my car. I'm like, that car that I just rode costs twice of what this one costs, plus minus, right? but it is so much more car, like a significant amount of everything better. And then when you look at even the American car producers, I believe even the CEO of Ford currently drives a BYD.
Does he
Because
really?
he prefers it over his own. I mean, if you need a more grading or deeply cutting indictment of that system.
Yeah,
Well, to be fair, that's Ford. That's fair that he doesn't want to drive a Ford. That's not all of them.
Fair enough.
I think you describe a lot of very valid problems with capitalism as it is right now with our current economic model, especially like switching to making things services and going to the subscription model. There's a lot of cynicism in American capitalism right now, and part of that is because so many of these big companies are publicly traded and they have to worry about the stock price. So that's by all means necessary. Your job now becomes figure out how to make as much money as possible without regard for the customer and without regard for your employees. And if you're able to do that, then you get all the stock benefits that you could ever want. And the motivations are, I think they're definitely screwed up. And I think, the accumulation of wealth at the top is a significant problem that's already starting to become an issue. I think it's probably going to become more of an issue the way that it's set up. But in terms of like implementing what you believe to be the best economic plan for a country, how does that even work? Because I think that's where we can sit back and be like, this sucks, we don't like this. And I think the vast majority of Americans, when you ask them about those specific issues that you're describing as problems inherent to American capitalism, they would agree with a Marxist on a lot of those points. Like Big T, I know that you, like when it comes to subscriptions or cable services and things like that, like it's annoying the way that it feels like we're being nickeled and dimed for everything that we've got. But when it comes to implementing that, how do you even start to go about implementing it without running into a whole host of other issues that might be worse than where we're at right now?
Sure thing, yeah. I would also like to preface, I really like Big T's questions, so I'm definitely down for a lot more of those if he's down himself.
Okay.
But about your particular question, how would you go about implementing what I would see, for example, as a positive change in the American system? This is the kind of the crux of it. It's not up to me. Of course, I can give you suggestions, and I will give you suggestions of what I think would be a good starting point, because it's a relative, general good starting point for most countries. But the people who are best equipped to make these suggestions and the people who are best equipped to make this analysis are Americans themselves. People who are educated in this particular sphere, who have the theoretical background as well as the ability to access the information and parse it in the way that they need to be able to realize, okay, well, we have deficiencies in this particular economic sector and this form of bureaucratic burdening of the American population, this logistical nightmare that we have in providing this particular service, so on and so forth. And then the Americans who are educated in this can come about and create a plan that then can be presented to the American populace, and then they can vote on if they think this sounds good or not, and then be implemented, so on and so forth. The general prescription, if I'm allowed to say it. It's the first word that comes to my mind as a doctor. The general prescription that comes is this. When it comes to the American political system, significant changes need to be done before any economic changes can come into play. And that would mean breaking the power of capital to an extent. And this is already blasphemy in the American civic religion perspective, right? The ability to, quote unquote, break the power of capital. What I mean by this is like that. To make the United States a truly democratic nation, that means that one person, one vote, not $1, one vote. Lobbying should not be a thing in the United States. For example, if I own a massive weapons manufacturing company, I should not be able to go and basically pad the pockets of the entire House of Representatives with $20,000 to $300,000 bribes so that they can basically vote in whatever I want, right? Which means, oh, you know what? Let's increase state subsidies to my plants which produce weapons so that I can use American tax money to benefit to offset my business expenses. This is corruption, essentially. You're giving a bribe and you're getting a kickback from it. But this is perfectly legal in the American system, right? This is one example, by the way. This is replicated across every industry. Agribusiness, pharmaceuticals, the weapons industry I mentioned, insurances, food production generally. Think about a lobby, a sector, an economic sector. There's a lobby for that greatly influences and affects the political choices of your representatives. This needs to be cancelled. This needs to be completely torn apart, and the American people should be able to as mentioned, one person, one vote on policies based on what they consider after informed dialogue and information, not obfuscation and lies and whatnot that everybody's going to... I'll give you a good example. At the time, during the Russian Revolution, right? A lot of people were peasants, particularly, were ignorant of what socialism was because they were very far away from the urban centers. So they couldn't read, they couldn't write, so they couldn't get accurate information as to what socialism was. So certain reactionary forces that were against socialism, they would go to these peasants and they'd tell them, socialism is for the social ownership of women. That means nobody has a wife. Your wife belongs to every man in the village, for example. They would give this example. Or they'd be like, everybody would have to sleep under an oversized blanket. It sounds silly, but when you're talking to an uneducated and illiterate peasant, they believe this stuff, right? And they're like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to share my wife with the entire village. I don't want to sleep under one oversized blanket with the rest of the, it's a similar thing that kind of happens a little bit more developed, but similar thing whenever you watch any American mass media, right? Fox News is the perfect example, really, but almost every other media outlet has a sort of similar level of nonsense that you hear, right? About what policies are, what certain political policies people have, and how they're presented in the media versus how they're presented in the media. So first and foremost, you need to break the power of the lobby. Secondly, you need to have a truly independent journalistic system. The vast majority of media in the United States is owned by private interests that directly want to serve their own private interests. They want to make money. They don't care about the American population. This needs to be broken as well. Media should serve the population and give them accurate and factual information, not be used to serve the bottom line of Bezos or whoever else. Right, amongst many other changes that need to be done politically. Once that's done, of course, how and what tempo and what form and whatnot, that's for Americans to choose, right? And a dedicated American institution or organization to decide the details of. After this, then you get into the economics of it. It kind of links back to your previous question, Big T, which was about increased productivity through capitalism. Something you notice very interestingly is that there used to be many publicly owned services in the United States. By the way, public ownership does not necessarily mean socialism. It's a little more complex than this, but I don't want to drone on too much. When certain sectors of the economy or certain things that were used to be publicly owned became privately owned, by majority, and I mean across the entire nation, by majority, these services decreased in quality. They became more expensive and they became worse. A perfect example is water privatization in the United States, right? I don't know if you exist in a water privatized area in the United States. I don't know where you guys are.
We have public water here in Chicago, yeah.
All right. Well, for example, but in certain parts of the northeast of the United States, I believe, amongst many others, I believe Atlanta's water supply as well used to be publicly owned and then it became privately owned. And they realized that the maintenance of the pipes became worse just generally. There were more breakdowns and more and lower quality of water, meaning more unhealthy minerals and byproducts and whatnot in the water than had been before. General waiting time on maintenance and whatnot increased overall. Prices increased. The only thing that became more efficient, funnily enough, there's research done on this, the only thing that became more efficient was collection on late payment fees. That's the only thing that became more efficient, unsurprisingly, because they want to make a profit. This is also replicated across electricity grid ownership and whatnot. Public, when it shifts to private, when it becomes privatized, it becomes worse just in almost every aspect. And this is replicated not only in the United States, this is across many capitalist nations across the world, from Bolivia to Ukraine and wherever else, right? But when we get to the economic section, this is what the reason I tied this together is nationalizing the most important parts of the economy. In Chinese parlance, this is called the commanding heights of the economy. What this means is the largest most important industrial sectors, defense, healthcare, so on and so forth. These things need to be publicly owned, not privately owned. Number one, because they directly affect the living quality or the quality of life of the vast majority of the population, meaning Americans in this case. But also number two, because it is incredibly important that the government can steer these massive and most important core industries towards certain beneficial social aims. Let's say you want to start universal healthcare. If you have a publicly owned healthcare system, this is relatively easy. It's a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare and to get it off the ground, but you can get it off the ground. If you have to do this between hundreds, if not thousands, of privately owned different clinics and hospitals and insurance companies and whatnot, then you're going to be in litigation and legal fields for the next 3 centuries comparatively, right? That's my point. You need to nationalize these commanding heights so that you can streamline their general work and function, and then you need to focus on the most important things that the United States needs. From my perspective as an Iraqi looking from the outside in, you guys have a much better perspective. You know better, way better than I do, right? Because you live in that system. But from me being an outsider looking in, it seems like the United States needs most of all infrastructure development. The quality of infrastructure in the United States, from what I've seen just from research, is to use a technical term, dog shit.
Yep.
From the quality of roads to the quality of bridges that are collapsing once every couple of weeks, the quality of schools, so on and so forth.
Transportation,
airports, yeah,
just across the board.
We don't have a train system. I mean, I guess we have Amtrak, and Amtrak could be looked at as being a success story, but they're trying to privatize parts of Amtrak now. But every time there's a map that goes viral online of this is what the United States would look like with high-speed rail, I just stare at it for about 5 hours, and I just look at it. It makes me happy to look at the fake map that doesn't exist.
Weep the bitter tears.
Yeah.
Not to make you weep a little bit more. If you look at the Chinese example, again, of course, China is not perfect, but I'm just saying China is a poorer country relative to the United States, and this is what they've achieved. Imagine what the United States can achieve. That's kind of the parallel I want to bring to you. The Chinese, 20 years ago, plus minus, said, hey, we need high-speed rail. Now, 20, 25 years after they made that political decision, they have more high-speed rail than the entire world combined. Mm-hmm. They recently built a line between Beijing and Shanghai, which I believe is 650 kilometers apart. I think that's like 550 miles, 580 miles, something like this. Don't quote me on that. I'm not very good with the conversion from metric to imperial. Regardless, their high-speed train can go at speeds, their slow speeds are like 280 miles an hour. They can go up to 500 miles an hour, nearly plane speeds. Now imagine you want to go and take if this was done in the United States, you can take a train from New York and land and be in Los Angeles in just a few hours generally, right? Compared to the nightmare that it would be with the planes and the TSA and then having to book ahead of time and maybe they sold your seat to somebody else despite you having the ticket, which has happened with Delta and all these other airlines, so on and so forth, all these nightmares that happen. The potential of the United States, should they take the political decision to build this infrastructure, it would go much faster than the Chinese. You have the industrial base, you have the technology, you have the minds that are capable of carrying it out. It is a shame that this is not done. And the amount of significant economic benefit that this would bring the United States. I believe in China, it brings a net profit of $30 billion equivalent. This is after all the expenses of building high-speed rail. It brings in $30 billion in revenue. In the United States, it would be many times that. Right, because the American population, for both good and bad reasons, is a very hardworking population, sometimes too hardworking. That's why Americans work 2 or 3 jobs and still can't put food on the table. This is an alien experience to most people outside of the United States. I can't imagine working 2 jobs or 3 jobs. That is a nightmare. So that's my point, though. You're a hardworking population. You could achieve significantly more. But bringing it back onto the nationalization point, though. Nationalizing certain important sectors of the economy, and then starting a drive for infrastructure development, trains, and a rail track, new roads, new schools, new bridges, new dams, so on and so forth. This would create a tremendous amount of jobs for the United States, which is already suffering from an unemployment crisis, and would resurrect the economic industrial base that has been languishing since the 1950s, essentially. The once significant industrial base that rebuilt all of Europe, essentially, after World War II. The next thing that we need to be invested in is just education in general. You have privatized education, which is insane. I don't know of a single country that will not invest in the future of its own children, in that neglects the investment in its own future, which is its youth, as much as the United States. How can you put $50,000 to $500,000 of debt on people who want to get an education? That's insane to me to even imagine, right? I went to med school. It's 6 years. I ate shit during med school, and I had to pay out of pocket, of course, for it to a certain extent. But the amount relatively to my American colleagues that they had to pay is like several orders of magnitude more money. I would be in debt for the next 30 years if I had to pay what my American colleagues pay. That's insane to even think about. That's such a that is that's basically you're telling your people, your average American kid, hey, maybe it's not worth it to be a doctor. Maybe it's not worth it to become a medical professional and to serve your population and your community, because you're just going to be eating shit with all this debt. And God forbid you get in one accident and you can't work for 6 months. God forbid something happens to your hand and you can't operate. God forbid something happens to you mentally and you need to be out of work for a while. All this debt sits accruing interest and will eventually kill you and erode your ability to create wealth for you or your family and so on and so forth. This is a nightmare scenario. So you need to essentially, if not fully nationalize healthcare, then create a highly subsidized, if you not nationalize education, then you'd have to create a highly subsidized education system like once existed in the United States, where people had to pay the equivalent of what was like $100 essentially for their tuition year or semester. And then the final thing that you need to heavily invest in is healthcare. The American population is a sickly population. The United States has some of the highest rates of obesity and diabetes. It's not.
No, you're right. You're right.
It sounds horrible.
You just call us fat, bro.
I don't mean it in that way. I don't mean it in a derogatory way.
Good,
No.
good,
Yeah,
good.
I mean cardiovascular disease in general, diabetes, the abysmal state of the elderly in the United States and how they get zero help. In essence, or if they get help, they have to pay $15,000 a month for it, essentially draining their retirements and their savings and what they could possibly give in inheritance to their children, so on and so forth. This is also a nightmare scenario. A nation that doesn't invest in its children's future through education is ignorant. A nation that does not invest in its nation's healthcare and their well-being and their quality of life is an evil nation, because in that case, the American government and those who sit atop of it are prioritizing the slender or the profits, massive profits for the smallest slither of the population. We're talking about a few thousand people who own everything, essentially, right? The absolute wealthiest at the top, at the expense of 300 million Americans who are the ones who do all the work, who are the ones who tire day in, day out to build roads or to go to work in schools or universities, or who work even retail and all the people who make the system work. The people who actually are there to do the logistics, stack the shelves, do the operations, run the trains, and so on and so forth. It is a broken system, is my point. Yeah, and that's why you need to do the things that I mentioned.
Big T, do you have any?
But Americans decide this, not me.
Right. Big T, do you have any other questions?
I had two more, but I think you just kind of answered one of them. So I'll end with this is a more personal question than a structural one necessarily. What is your opinion, just personally, of someone who lives in the United States, who works, just a normal 9-to-5 job for 40 years, makes $70,000, whatever, does fine, and buys a house and has kids, and they enjoy that. They like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would say to them, I'm glad that they're enjoying it, but human beings are a social species. We don't exist as individuals. Despite the fact that the American system is highly atomized and individualistic, we are a social species. We enjoy communities, we create families, we like to develop our families and eventually possibly even give something to our children. A person who enjoys this existence has full right to enjoy this existence, but they should also have the sense to understand that I've had it well, but the vast majority of my fellow countrymen, I would like to imagine that most Americans are patriots to a certain extent. They like their country, they like their fellow countrymen, and so on and so forth. My countrymen are not in nearly as good a condition as I am. And what's even more scary is that generation after generation, the living quality, the total net ownership, the total wealth, and so on, is worse generation after generation. When you compare baby boomers to Gen X to Gen Z and to Generation Alpha, the amount of net wealth that they own gets less and less. The amount that they own is less and less. So on and so forth. That means that this guy who lives a perfectly comfortable life as he does, his kids or possibly his grandkids might not. That's the problem. If he does not get politically engaged in some extent to somewhat improve the system, then his comfort and apathy towards doing anything about the current system existent could result in, or could somewhat contribute to, the worsened life condition or quality of life of his children, of his grandchildren, or in a much more broader sense, his fellow countrymen. From his mailman to the guy who serves him his burrito, to the guy who built his road and who laid the asphalt in front of his driveway. And that's kind of the point, right? I'm glad that he likes his life, but one should have a wider perspective and realize that other people do not, and the tendency is for Americans to have worse and worse lives. It's time for an economic and political change.
I have one last question for you, Hakim, as well said.
Sure.
your voice. You have a perfect voice for YouTube. Do you know that? Like, do you know that your voice? Like, I can see why you have a lot of subscribers. When I hear you speak, it's like I'm hearing 50 videos that I've seen from highly successful channels on YouTube. Have you worked on that?
I have not. No, this is just my voice. I have never. The only thing that I did was I got more comfortable. I used to be much more robotic in my delivery because I'm just reading a script most of the time. I'm not off the cuff like I'm doing now. But I try to kind of make it more natural sounding. People always comment that I speak too fast, and I try to slow myself down, but I don't know why. It makes it sound strange to me.
No,
what's more impressive is I know from watching your videos, this is English isn't your first language, so that's
it is not. No.
It's impressive that you have the lexicon in the depth of English that you do, and this is not your first language. So shout out to you, bro.
I genuinely appreciate that. Thank you very much. It is. I will say Americans always notice that I'm not American though, and that's because I think my enunciation gives it away with certain words. And the example I always like to give is internet. I think most Americans say internet.
Yeah,
you pronounce the hell out of them words.
Yeah, I say internet. And everybody immediately knows, like, you're not from around here, are you? So people say, oh, you must have been to the States. You must have lived in the States. I'm like, nah, I have not.
Yeah, well, it's working. Whatever you're doing has worked pretty well for you. So we appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully we learned something today. I think we did. I think we all did. So yeah,
if people like what I do, if they're interested to hear more, I have my YouTube channel, which is just by the same name, Hakim, Hakim. I run a podcast with two other fantastic creators, one of which is American. So I think there'll be a lot more parallels that people can drive there. The podcast is called The Deprogram. I'm sure we can get a link in the show notes or whatever.
Yep.
So I highly recommend people check out. We kind of cover both current events and news and whatnot, but also we cover very specific, for example, historical instances, different kinds of industry in the United States, who runs them, why, the different political changes that happen across the world, in the United States and abroad. It's a fun show. It's a little more bro-y sometimes because it's just three guys. But give it a go. I think if you enjoy the show, then you're gonna have a fun time with the Deprogram. So give it a check out.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Hakim. Really appreciate you joining the show.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you, brother. Have a good one.
Take care, man. So that was Hakim. I didn't want to interject when he was describing Marxism at the very beginning, but what he was talking about sounds a lot like the Green Bay Packers. Are the Green Bay Packers a Marxist football organization?
It kind of is. Yeah,
the entire city.
Low-key. That shit's funny. Yeah, it's publicly owned. Yeah,
they got shareholder meetings.
Yeah. How much of the Packers is owned by the public? It's like a small percentage, right? It's like 1 or 2, something like that.
No, it's like 100%.
Is it really?
No, but anyone who owns it owns nothing.
Who collectively?
Like you.
It's not like it's not like a co-op though. Like
I own a share of the Green Bay Packers.
Gotcha.
Our gambling goldfish owned a share of the Green Bay Packers.
Well, they have to have. You said if it's 100%, it can't be 100% owned by the public, or else they would have to have like board meetings and like, you know what I mean? Like
they have a president. They don't have a team owner.
Every team has a president.
Well, this guy is not the team owner. He is like in charge of. They have a new guy that comes in every now and again.
Huh.
The team's shares are held by over 500,000 shareholders, but no one shareholder can own more than 200,000 shares, which represents approximately 4% of the team's total outstanding shares.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. It's pretty cool
Mark
idea.
Murphy was the old one. He just retired.
Yeah. Is it?
Team president role that essentially acts as the owner when it comes to voting on NFL policies.
Yep.
So he's the guy that tried to ban the tush push?
We don't know. Matt LaFleur denies that it was him. He acted like he had nothing to do with it. I believe him, though. I think that call is coming from above his head. And it's probably because they don't have an actual owner to get mad at.
Yeah.
It's just like the organization is asking to ban the tush push.
All right. That was Hakim. And I really enjoyed talking to him, man. PFT had to shake. He's leaving us for his other family once again.
Interviewed Mike Miller.
He's interviewing Mike Miller. Keller.
Good ball player.
Great ball player, man. Great ball player. I kind of want to get your thoughts, man. Your the whole synopsis of what you got from that conversation, because you're you are a capitalist and you believe in that political and economic theory. So I would like to get your read on kind of what he was saying. Obviously, you don't agree, but I kind of want to get you a feel on how you felt coming in versus leaving that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that he and I agree on much, although I did look at his YouTube channel and he and I might have kind of a horseshoe thing going on.
Okay.
Cuz he has a video entitled USAID is a terrorist organization. Now, I think he and I probably dislike that for different reasons, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how much he and I agree on. I think he's very knowledgeable, obviously. He was good to talk to. I think it was good.
Yeah, so I'm glad he came on the show because I think a lot of people, I hope a lot of people, I know there's going to be a lot of, as soon as they hear the term Marxism, they shut down. But I think anytime I've talked to people and explained it in a way that it's like, dog, you go to work at Barstool every day, and Marxists believe that you should own a part of the work that you're producing. Like that's basically what they want more for your labor, and they believe that capitalists, people that have an idea, exploit that labor for their gain. And I think I think that people are voting against their own interests, but
I do wish I had asked. I didn't want to be adversarial necessarily, but I do wish I had asked. So to whatever extent that's true, I mean, he seemed he seemed to like Cuba a lot, but almost every country that's ever implemented Marxist policies has ended up in a remarkably repressive government with a impoverished population and worse outcomes than they had before.
Yeah, his explanation was long-winded, but he explains why, right? The reasons why is because, and this, like he also alluded to this, was like the CIA admitted all this, right? Anytime there was any kind of communist or Marxist um, uh, political government that was establishing, the U.S. made it their duty to put embargoes on them and cut off trades and trade routes for other people, for other countries. So countries, the U.S. being in a huge global, so huge in the global market, that if U.S. says, it's like, I don't know if you remember when Cuban cigars used to be illegal. You remember that? And so that's one of their biggest imports, right? And so if you want to deal with the American market, they say, okay, if you deal with Cuba, you can't deal with us, or they do these high tariffs. Well, countries don't want to deal with that, so they say we'll just deal with them. So that leaves you cut off the hands of the people in that place, and so it kind of drowns the economy and doesn't lead for a lot of affluence. And so that's the thought behind it. And also what he was saying was, if all of the bad things that you levy on either communist or socialist countries that become repressive regimes, they never levy that against capitalist ones. So he specifically mentioned American chattel slavery, where you don't look at that atrocity and say that was a part of the capitalist system, but it absolutely 100% was. It literally was free labor. And so you're not going to look at that big thing and say that's a product of capitalism. You're going to be like, that was just a horrendous thing.
Well, were the gulags a product of Marxism?
Well, this is the point, is you're not going to look at it from that lens, right? Because you're an American and you were taught that was just a bad thing that people did.
No, but that's fine. You can do that, but it's not like Marxist countries have been like very peaceful places to live. Often, very much to the contrary.
Well, that's not true. This is part of the propaganda. Like he was saying, Cuba, for instance, has the higher literacy rates than America, has better healthcare per capita than America, lower infant mortality rates than America. Right? They're not just these crazy places that people live. Like there's bad shit that happens in America. There's for instance, you wouldn't look at American school shootings as a product of a capitalist system, would you? But that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. And people look at our country and say that's fucking insane that we allow that. Like that's crazy. So he also said that when you look at how much he paid for his college and his medical field versus his colleagues from America, he's like, are you guys fucking crazy to make people pay, to make your citizens pay to want to get educated? That's also insane. It's insane to me too. And it's insane to people outside of the veil of America. But you live in America, so you don't look at it. You don't critique America with the same lens that you critique other countries.
Well, no, I think you're doing what you're accusing me of. Like, what about all the millions of people that Mao killed? Is that not a product of
this? No, look, I'm saying those were bad things, but you say that's because of communism. And when I say American chattel slavery was because of capitalism, you say, nah, that was just bad people. I'm saying bad people do bad shit, regardless of whatever economic system that you're under. Right now, this podcast is a socialist podcast, right? It's the only socialist podcast of Barstool, right? But you appreciate that because you reap the benefits of that. That's you can have a political like a leftist political worldview without murder. Like bad people do bad shit.
I don't think you say I don't say slavery is a product of capital. You can say that if you want. I don't really care. It's terrible either way. But then you say that the millions of people died as a far more direct implementation of communism, and then you seem to not be like
no. What I'm trying to get you to see is that it is the people dying is not a product of the political thought. The people dying is the product of the corruption of the people living in that society. Millions of people die. Okay,
but it's happened over and over and over again. So
the millions of people that have died through the imperialistic efforts of the United States of America's foreign policy, do you attribute that to capitalism?
Not necessarily.
That's my point. You don't view it through that lens because
I'm willing to listen to your argument for that.
Okay, if we set up military bases all across the world, right, to secure natural resources so that we can have a foothold in the Congo, in the Middle East, in all these places, so that we can have a natural resource that our people then import back to America and use in our economy. That is capitalistic in nature.
Okay, fine. But
there's millions of people that have died because of those endeavors.
There are millions of people who have died under the implementation of communism. And you say that's because of a bastardization of the power structure.
No, what I'm saying,
well, it happens every time.
No. What I'm saying is bad people do bad shit. I'm anti-capitalist in the sense that I don't think it's that it's the most efficient, right? And I've heard all the arguments of lifting people out of poverty. I've heard all those arguments before, and we can go down that road if you want. But when I say I don't think it's the most efficient versus and the most moral. Okay, so just like we'll use this podcast for an example, right? It used to be, it was just the owners of the podcast that got the dividends from all of the ad revenue dollars and stuff like that, right? Changing that to everybody gets a fair share. I believe that's moral because you guys spent just as much time on this podcast as we do, if not more. So you deserve more of the share than what was originally given, right? Tell me how that turns into millions of people dying.
Well, that's a good question. You're referring to an implementation of something on a remarkably tiny scale that doesn't have millions of people at stake. It doesn't have to centralize the power of a national government and allocate resources based on that. You could even, like, it hasn't in even smaller countries, but like you could make the argument in a perfect world with no outside factors that all of Marx's ideas could work in a tiny nation where, there's 7,000 people, whatever. But on the scale of Maoist China or Venezuela or wherever else, it can't work. It's been proven to not work. And then you would say that, like, that is like I said, a bastardization of the of the principles,
No.
but it happens in each case, in which at some point, that's just what happens.
No, it's not. I'm not sure if you're actually hearing what I'm saying. What I'm
No, I am.
what I'm saying, what he said, right? Like address this point. I want you to address this point that every time a nation, right, like a Venezuela, a Cuba, has adopted a socialist or a Marxist regime or a communist regime, and these are all separate things, by the way. So it's like I hear a lot of the talking. It's like socialist. They're very different things, to varying degrees, anyway. Anytime one of those runners regimes adopt one of those economic thoughts, the U.S. actively sabotages it, actively embargoes all of those countries. Like you have to address that point. How can if you cut off if I'm a country, like how do we grow GDP? How do we make money as a country, right? We have to laborers have to extract some kind of resource that the world on a global scale wants, right? Like
Sure.
That's how we make our money. If the U.S. says, "Hey, if you deal with this country, we're cutting your access to our market off," that stymies any kind of economic growth for that country. Would you agree with that?
Okay, but I don't see what that has to do with Maoist China. I think Mao. What?
Because I want you to address that point.
I don't see.
You
I don't
brought up
understand what
Venezuela, you
difference
brought
it
up Cuba,
makes.
right?
Sure.
How?
I mean, that's a price you pay. You're making that decision. I don't. Would you agree that Mao's principles were implemented pretty close to the way he wanted them to?
I wouldn't pretend to know what's in Mao's head.
Okay, but I don't think that's controversial to say.
Okay.
And that resulted in
Wait, that
one of the worst.
Mao implemented what Karl Marx wanted?
No, what Mao wanted.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, obviously.
And that ended pretty terribly.
I'm not a Maoist.
So the argument that it's
Mao, I'm not defending
well,
Mao.
so the argument that it's the U.S. government that is, preventing communism from working, I don't think really.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not even a communist, right? Like, I mean, we joke about it.
You've told me
like,
before you are a communist, verbatim.
Huh?
You've told me before you are a communist.
In the sense of like the word.
And I know you're very particular about verbiage, so I know for a fact that was the verbiage.
In the sense of the word, I think that we all are, right? I think you as a Christian is as well. Like, I think that in the end, you would want a place where people did not have to want for nothing, that people had everything that they ever wanted.
I have a great place to tell you about.
Yeah, I agree, right? Heaven is communist, right? There's a stateless, classless, moneyless, borderless society. That's what communism is. I am a communist in the sense of like, yeah, I would love to get to that place, but pragmatically, we're nowhere close to that. Like having conversations like I just said, like this example of this podcast, right? Of convincing people that socialism is divvying up the pie so that you have more. Like trying to have that conversation with people in today's America is they look at you like you're insane and like, oh, easy for you to say you're a big time NFL player. Like, dog, like all I'm saying is y'all deserve more as workers. All I'm saying is I want you to be able to get sick and not have that derail your life. That's all I'm saying.
And all I am saying in response is on a macro scale, no pun intended, it has never worked. And it always results in a repressive.
It's not true. It's just not
regime. Which one hasn't?
Well, there's never been a stateless, borderless, classless, moneyless society. But
okay, sure, but there have been Marxist ones, which is what we were talking about.
Like when I say socialism, you kind of like, right? Like you get a visceral feeling of like disgust. Correct?
No, I'm numb to it. It's been too long.
Well, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, when you hear socialism, like, yeah, right?
Okay.
No, I'm asking a question.
I mean, I've done it for so long. It doesn't faze me. But
wait, you've done what?
Sure. Huh?
You've done what?
Had this conversation with you.
No,
many,
I'm
many
not talking
times.
about with me. I'm talking about in general. Like when you hear something, okay, if you hear a company is a worker co-op and it's a socialist company, what do you feel? Like,
I mean, you're asking the wrong guy. I don't really care, but
all right, so in general, Americans kind of get this visceral reaction like it's bad, right? But there's plenty of pockets where it works, right? And you like you say, well, it doesn't work. It does work in varying degrees. I think that we're hundreds and hundreds of years away from if we were to implement it, we're nowhere close. We're nowhere close to where I would want, right? And so like I think when people hear me say I'm anti-capitalist, I feel like they just feel like I'm like, I don't know, like this, they demonize it in this way. But every time I provide examples of how it's more moral a system, they don't disagree with it, and neither would you.
But I
And
just said, like you just said, it works in pockets. Okay. And then on a national broad scale, it doesn't.
well, I guess nothing does, and I think that's where.
And that's a good point. That's a good point. I think some of this, like the word utopian is literally used in Marxist, communist, whatever you want, ideology.
Mhm.
I think a lot of this is born out of what I think, I forget what exactly we were talking about, but one time you and I distilled what we think the biggest issue with each other's ideologies was. And I said, I think the left is far too utopian, or what's the word I'm looking for? Think how things should be, right?
Mm-hmm.
This shouldn't happen. Okay, well, it does sometimes, and that sucks, but so we need to figure out a way to mitigate that. Well, it shouldn't happen. Okay, we can just do that in circles. I think that particular, like Marxism is born out of a literal utopian ideal, whereas capitalism, are things going to go wrong? Sure, you're never going to prevent all evil in the world. That's not possible. But capitalism, I think, does a better job of working for most people on a broad scale. It gives people a reason to try to innovate. It gives plenty of people. You got very rich in a very capitalistic industry. I think that's awesome.
Yeah,
Like,
but it's exploitive. So like what you're describing is correct. Yes, capitalism can work on a broad scale, but it will die without social safety nets. And those social safety nets are what socialism is. It's like it will die without Medicaid, it will die without Medicare, it will die without Social Security. Capitalism will die without these things.
okay, but then if we take the capitalism part away and we do just that, those fail too.
I don't think they would. But this is where we probably disagree, and this is why I feel like Hakim made a great point where when PFT asked him like, how would you implement all this, right? There are certain things in structure in this society that keep this show running, right? Lobbying, shit like that. The military industrial complex, shit like that, right? Not one person ever, anytime we get in a war, anytime we fund the war, says, well, how are we going to pay for that? We know exactly how we're going to pay for that, right? But anytime you want to do anything for the people of this country, it's always, well, who's going to pay for it? Every single time. And like, that's infuriating to me. And so we live in this mixed market economy in which I always advocate for what I believe to be the more moral thing, and that is paying people for their labor a fair wage, like so they don't have to work 2 to 3 jobs. So a medical bill doesn't cripple them for the next 10 years. School doesn't cripple them for the next 10 years. Like that's how my worldview aligns. And like, yeah, you're right, shit does happen, but that's to me is what other people are for in my community. Like if something goes down, like I should be able to help my neighbor, and I shouldn't have a problem with that. And I feel like that's the fundamental tug and pull between this conversation on the sides that I for the life of me I can't understand. But that's all good. Good conversations. All right. Well, we didn't save the world on this podcast, but y'all stay tuned as we attempt to save the world one podcast at a time. Hopefully one day we will. We appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Much love. We'll see you next week. Eric gonna be back, as well as the rest of the Macrodosing crew. All right, y'all. Be easy.